Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 43 of the Yorkshire Gamer Reet Big Wargames podcast. And today's guest is Paul Thompson from Early War Miniatures. And we'll be popping over to the interview section very soon to speak to Paul about the company and lots of other things. But before we do so, a few announcements, a little bit of housekeeping like we always do. And just following the last episode, 42, couple of days after that came out, the podcast reached 75,000 downloads in the various formats that it's released. So, yes, that's 75,000. And to be honest, 74,000 are not my mum. But thank you very much, everyone who listens to the podcast. That's quite an amazing number to reach, and I'd never expected to have that many regular listeners. A couple of the podcasts that are now approaching 3,000 downloads individually, which is absolutely amazing. So thank you everyone out there who does listen, and if you know anyone who might be interested, then let them know, let them have a listen. At the end of the day, it's free, and if you do get a chance to give us a follow or a like or a comment or a review wherever you listen to, so that the profile goes up so more people listen, that would be absolutely lovely. Just for the benefit of newer listeners, and a lot of people have come on board this year, just so you're aware, there are two different versions of the podcast. They're the same episode, but the episode comes out in an audio-only format. It's released on Podbean, but you can get it on any major podcast host, and that's just the audio version, and that comes out first because that's the format that I pay to have my podcast hosted. So that's the one that gets the preference. So you don't pay at the end of the day; it's all free. And then I then put out a second edition or version, again same audio, but with a video run through of some photographs related to my guest, and that's put out on the Yorkshire Gamer YouTube channel, and that usually comes out the day of or close to the next audio podcast. So it's kind of one podcast behind if you're watching this on YouTube. So the last episode with George Nafziger, the episode 42, very well received, and I think I managed to rescue it from the nightmare that we had recording it, and it's edited together really well, so I'm very happy with that. And it was great to talk to George, and hopefully one day soon I'll get across the States and meet him in person. And in other news, as my good mate Sean Clark has come back with his podcast God's Own Scale, and he had a brilliant guest lined up for his first episode back, in episode 51, but sadly they weren't available, so he had me on instead. And me and Sean had a good chat for a couple of hours about all things wargaming, and it's great to see him back on the air. And he will have a great lineup of guests coming forward over the next weeks and months, I hope. And it adds another wargaming related podcast to the list that you hopefully already listened to. So well done, Sean. Great to see you back, mate. Really good to be on the show as well as a guest. So thanks for that. So, on to today. We're talking to Paul Thompson. Paul is a great guy, really fun chap to talk to, and he's got loads and loads of stories. So you may have noticed already that this is quite a lengthy episode, and I really enjoyed talking to Paul. It was so much fun, and we covered all sorts of stuff, obviously relating to his business. But there's a fantastic story about a investigation into a German raid on the Isle of Wight in 1943, which is well worth a listen, as well as many other stories. So I know you're going to enjoy it. There's a little bit of mic interference at Paul's end. He had some people working nearby, and later on in the episode, we're joined by what's Sounds like a flock of birds. So if you do hear tweeting in the background, you're not going mad. It is on the recording, but I'm sure it won't spoil the listen. So sit back, get this in a cup of tea, some donuts, or a bit of cheese and biscuits, whatever you like to eat. And without further ado, here's the interview.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, once again to the interview section of the Yorkshire Gamer podcast. And having run out of steam on the way back from America for the last episode, the Yorkshire Airlines Pigeon has stopped for a rest on the South Island of England for today's guest. And as always, there's loads to cover. He started a company in 2010 making a range of models and figures for the war games hobby, and the company has gone from its early 6 foot trade space to a huge walk-in area with free ginger biscuits. Specialising in 20mm with items covering the world wars and in between, the company is well known for its quality and its coverage of lesser known theatres and participants. So, if you desperately need some World War II Danish infantry on Nimbus motorcycle and sidecar combinations, or that selection of infantry from the Royal Army of Siam from 1930, this is your guy. Always a happy face to see at a show. My guest is here to talk about himself as well as the company Early War Miniatures. So let's give a Reet big warm welcome to the latest guest on the show. Hello, Paul Thompson.
Hello, Ken. Well, that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much indeed. You've obviously done your homework. Yes, and ginger nuts, always welcoming with my ginger nuts at shows.
Oh, it's a sight to see everywhere you go, mate. I like a little bit of eccentricity on the show, so that's a perfect thing. Better than just a bland stand, I have to say. I have to say. So there's lots to talk about, mate. But have you ever been a podcast guest before?
No, never. This is my first one, so I'm a podcast virgin.
Oh well, you do listen to the show though, don't you, mate?
Yes, very much so. And it was that eccentricity that you talked about in your podcast that really got Andy and I attracted to listening. When we're beavering away in the lower workshop, we often have podcasts and other game related media playing in the background, and Yorkshire Game has been a firm favourite.
Brilliant. That's lovely to hear, mate. That's lovely to hear. Well, before you get settled in, we have a thing called the 4 minute challenge. And that's just an opportunity to you to try and summarize your wargaming history in 4 minutes or less. And we'll go into lots of detail about some of the things that you cover in the 4 minutes, but it's just a little bit of an icebreaker and a chance to get you to get loosened up. So, have you done a bit of prep?
I did. I've made some extensive notes, and I shall look at them and try and read from them as we go through.
No worries, mate. Well, your 4 minutes starts now.
Well, as a young kid from the early '60s, I was fed on a very firm diet of Airfix models, Victor comics, a host of war films from the late '60s and early '70s, the wonderful Spike Milligan and his wartime memoir books, the award-winning World at War series, and my father being a veteran of the British Expeditionary Force from 1940. That and spending many summer weekends at Mum and Dad's caravan down in Shoeburyness, just where the artillery ranges were. So to hear the boom of artillery during those visits down there, and seeing the Shoebury garrison where I saw my first tank, and tanks is a whole different story. So with that as a background, it was really bound to happen. So as a kid of the '70s, I'd travel down to London, the Imperial War Museum, for example, where they had just the most magnificent First War display of tanks attacking trenches, where you could look along the line of the trenches. For those who remember the museum back in the '70s, it was just behind where the old Matilda II used to be,
Mm.
and that really seeing miniatures in that setting bought it for me. Totally inspiring stuff, both then and now. When at school, the discovery of books such as Tank Battles in Miniature, all those lovely pictures of 20mm models, and armour penetration tables. My first
Oh
time ever seeing such
yes.
thing. Oh, I got quite moist at the thought of all that, I tell you. And and visits to the local library where books by Featherstone and others. It was a whole new world. I just can't tell you really. My paper round money went to purchase Peter Lang figures for the first time. I bought some metal
Mm.
figures. and also it paid for the weekly Orbis World War II magazines that used to come out. So really a complete addiction, really, in that way. It was really kind of in my mid-teens I started to design my own kind of primitive figures, really, to address a growing need that I clearly had and realise now is the need to create something in miniature. It was a very dodgy Mulburian range, but the main reason for doing it back then was because, well, no one made them, and if you wanted such things back in those days, you had to make them or do conversions. And firm memory in there is Mum telling me off for making a real mess in her kitchen with practicing how to do home casting. Yeah, she was very good at letting me indulge me in that. I joined a Wargames club, MP Wargames group, which again exposes you to more games, more people, new rule sets, for example. Went to my first gaming convention, which I think was in Hastings. It was a whole weekend. It was really laid back, great time, really enjoyed it, really relaxed. Really big wargaming tables, first time ever seeing those. You know, I still remember them to this day, and also saw my first reenactments then as well. So late teens saw me getting into motorcycles and 15mm ancients, very popular at the time. 6th edition and WRG, that is, not the motorcycles. In 1986, led to my one and only competition participation, where I met some really great people. I met some bloody awful people as well, I tell you. It was the 15mm Ancients Nationals Championship, which was, yeah, I remember Jed, wonderful Jed, who started Chariot Miniatures, used to organise that. I actually won it by, I don't know how, but anyway, the short-arsed git from South London Warlords who lost in the final, he kept coming to my club and demanding a rematch. It was really not sort of person I wanted to wargame with, so I got a very harsh lesson early on there.
Yeah.
Anyway, building models of remote control submarines at 1/72 and 1/32 scale. Desire to build a working model submarine that fired torpedoes with escorts that dropped depth charges. Yeah, that was me, I'm afraid. And I terrorised many a local boating lake, torpedoing, no bang at the end of it, of course, and proudly displaying the tonnage pennants at the end. So the film Das Boat has a lot to answer for. Got into All the Roads' reenactment with the White Company in the early 80s, where I got to meet and make lifelong friends, Alan and Michael Perry being just two of them. They only lived a short way from me, so when I was an apprentice, I'd pop in at lunchtime, where Mrs. Perry would always welcome me with a cup of tea, and we'd sit and chat and look at all their big, wonderful new models they were creating. Very happy days. Always a keen attendee at Wargaming shows, did quite a few display games actually in the past as well, including Salute and Tunbridge Wells, at Cavalier Show. Periods of interest, really, Marlborough, Napoleonics, early World War II. World War II in some form has always been there, and the desire to do World War I. However, the last 15 years, the period focus has really been early World War II, interwar and World War I, submarine warfare and tanks. I did say I love tanks. Anyway, we'll talk about that more, I'm sure. And I saw my first tank at Shoebury with my father in 1970, and I've been smitten ever since. Nice. And at one point, Alan, Michael, and myself owned a Stuart Light tank, which we did some interesting stuff with, and we still own a 1944 Bren carrier, which we've driven all the way from Belgium to Arnhem twice now, the 60th and 70th anniversaries. 2010, I took ownership of Tom's Tins range, which I renamed to Early War Miniatures, and we launched that in 2011. So I love all unusual subjects. I think you know that a period like World War II, there's so much the game has missed. Things like Syria, Libya, Iraq, Thailand campaigns, just Wargaming Gold, boys' own adventure stuff, all on the tabletop. So that's really been my my passion and what's been behind. I mean, where else would you get British cavalry emerging from the desert to fight Vichy French in the Roman ruins of Palmyra in World War II?
Exactly.
It's just fantastic. Moving quickly on, board gaming with miniatures has featured a lot in my recent years, expanding and blowing these up. Lovely, glorious maps, but actually making them bigger and using miniatures. Chain of Command is certainly my favourite rule set, which we play a lot here. And there's a very positive anticipation right now for the wanting to play What a Cowboy, which I got my copy a couple of weeks ago. Thank you, Mr. Clark. And I plan to use some of my own miniatures, i.e. the late Mexicans in the 1890s Mexican border region with Americans. And lastly, but not least, this time of year, April onwards, sees a growing fascination with an interest in the Falklands, a war that actually I lived through. And so it's interesting to compare what the memory of back then tells us to what actually is coming out with all the new facts and published books that are coming out to this day. So there you go.
It was well over 4 minutes, but you were doing so well, I just let you go.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you. I was listening out for the ding. I was listening for Di Regan to say,
Yeah,
"That's
well,
it."
I've got a new microphone set up, and unfortunately, that doesn't come through anymore. So,
Ah,
but no, lovely. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. And you mentioned something there at the very start of your little chat there that we've not talked about before, and I'm surprised now that you've mentioned it. And that was the Spike Milligan books.
mm,
Adolf Hitler, My Part and His Downfall. I'm trying to remember the
yep.
other titles now.
Oh yeah, Rommel, Gunner
Yes,
Mussolini, and the post-war ones as well, of course. He wrote 7 in the series.
he was
So
he was a very interesting man, was Spike Milligan. Extremely
yeah,
funny and extremely kind of out there as well. Really, he was had a very different sense of humour. So, do you remember first picking those books up? Whereabouts did you get them from?
I do. Yes. So I can't quite remember how I got hold of it, but certainly family and friends knew of my interest in the subjects of the world wars, and I think it's because I was always addicted to watching the Q series whenever it
Yes,
came on
yes,
television.
yeah.
And so, which was just phenomenally funny. And I think it was Mother who bought me a paperback copy of Rommel Gunner
Yeah.
and of course, in there were just some of the best he'd convert pictures. His Hitlergrams, which were just in the style of Q series comedy, berating the Nazi regime from every possible point, just still makes me laugh to this day. So I've been a firm fan of Spike from early days. I actually had the pleasure of getting to see him in a little concert he did when he was still able.
Oh, right, amazing.
When he was, it would just do a little a mixture of playing a bit of music, singing a few songs, telling some jokes, and 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 just sitting there talking to the audience. It was just fantastic.
Wow.
And in one of my proud parts of my collections, I have the whole series of books on tape,
N-
still in shrink wrap, which he signed,
Oh,
not in front
yeah.
of me. I purchased it signed. So I love Spike. I just think his comedy and his memoirs of World War II are just great reading and great listening. Still listen to them. Heard them hundreds of times, but I listen to them still.
Yeah, he was able to bring across the humor that is in military circles, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's a horrible job, and that you will see and have to
Mm,
do horrible things. But everyone I've met has ever had anything to do with the military has always had a pretty amazing sense of humor, and those books kind of brought that across and made you realize that the guys out there doing that job um, did have a good time sometimes, and
mm,
it's lovely
yeah.
to read. And I'm glad you brought those up, because I'd forgotten about them. I honestly had, and you brought back some lovely memories there. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, good.
That's amazing. Um, and you mentioned as well that your dad was involved in the Second World War. So tell us what he was involved with.
Well, he was called back to the colours in 1939. He was a regular soldier in the early 30s, 34, I think, to 37. I've got a lovely picture of him at machine gun school, clowning around with his mates. And yeah, called back to the colours just before the start of World War II, and went to France in January 1940. Basically, the territorial battalion, which was made up from the
Mm,
reserves and the territorials. So, First Battalion Ox and Bucks, and was involved in those early May battles with the Germans. I was very lucky actually to come across the battalion diaries, and there's a lovely little story behind it which
yeah,
I'll share with you
yeah,
if
of
you're
course.
interested. So yeah, I was very keen to try and discover more, and there are some good books on the subject, but they normally cover many other parts as well. So I was aware of the battalion diaries, and I thought I'll keep a
Mm,
lookout for them. And before I was trading, I was on the other side of the counter, a regular attendee at Colours, for example. I'd been around the show, enjoyed it very much, was waiting for a buddy whilst he was doing his ablutions before we left. And I turned round and there was a bookshop stall. And on the end of the books was winking at me this green title.
oh,
I thought, I should kind of a quick look at it. I don't think I looked at that bookstall properly, being a real book fan. And I picked it out, and it was the Battalion Diaries, featuring the 1st Battalion. from 1939, ending in June 1940. And in that, it described their entire path where they were, what battles they're involved in. And of course, it talks a lot about the biggest battle that the BEF fought the Germans in 1940 that you don't often see referred to or even mentioned. And that's the battle at Comines, the Comines Canal, which is on the Belgium and French border, where effectively by them holding up for 3 days, it stopped the Germans closing the Dunkirk pocket prematurely. So long story short, I ended up going over there, having a trip and a visit, found this battlefield. The main reference point is the lovely old light railway line, which is still there. It's a push bike route now, but it's embanked, so you can clearly see it. And standing on there, and in this feature, there's a wonderful farmhouse which is set within a re-entrant, which is a kind of dip in the ground, which is very well described by the padre who wrote the diaries. And I thought I'll just go and have a look at that house up this long windy path, in the open. And as you get closer, you see kind of spang marks, bullet impacts all around the top windows. And I thought, well, I'll knock on the door. What's the harm? Knocked on the door, met two of the most wonderful people who happened to speak brilliant English. And they happen to also be local history interpreters for the area. So when I mentioned that this was my father's battlefield,
fantastic,
and I could see all the information, signs of it in their house, which they'd restored. We invited in. I went back for dinner the following night, where I got to meet two farmers who were young boys at the time, who were both 10 and 11, and they came to dinner. And the wonderful Belgian family translated their conversation for me.
Amazing.
I get quite emotional thinking about it, because they talked about, not my father clearly, but they talked about the Tommies, the soldiers who turned up to try and save them from the Germans, and the big 3-day battle that took place there. And they described a group of soldiers who turned up. He said they're all big, tall men, big, tall fellas. And as soon as they arrived in our farm, they all slumped to the ground and were so tired. But this, of course, was the guards who were coming up. They'd marched 30 miles to get to this battle to try and push the Germans back, who were making some inroads in this area. And so they described things that you would never read in books for certain. And being actually in the farmhouse, having dinner with the two gentlemen who were boys at the time, it was their farmhouse at the time, really brought me back closer to, what it was my father was involved in here. 3 days standing. They were the very end battalion of the end of the brigade at the end of the line, exactly where the German Schwerpunkt, the point of main effort, was directed. So now he was wounded in that operation and was a prisoner of war for 5 years. So something he never really talked that much about, but occasionally on good days he would talk about things. And one thing he talked to me about was firing a Vickers machine gun, which you probably see over my shoulder.
Guarding the coast.
Yeah, guarding the coast, exactly. And I remember him describing to me how you would, you'd kind of hold both the ends, and you'd squeeze press the plunger in the middle with your thumbs, and then just tap, plunge, tap, which is a way of kind of spreading the fire. And so, I've got a Vickers up here in the man cave at the moment, which is just a little memory of something that my father would have used.
That's an absolutely a fantastic story, and a fantastic that you've been able to connect so well with that period of history as well. It always amazes me when you go back and visit battlefields in Europe, that you do find these people who have memories of their parents or grandparents' time during the war. And I remember myself going hunting out some battles on the Normandy campaign, and we were similar to you, chatting with a farmer, and his English was very good, and he said, "Oh, I'll come, I show you this," and he was showing me this wall, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, I can't see anything really, but then he showed me. He said, look closely, and you could just see where the wall had been rebuilt, and there was like a concertina gap down either side, and that was where a Sherman tank had driven through the wall. And then he went on to tell the story of how, not of anything war related, but of how his dad was so angry with the driver because he knocked his wall down. And in the middle of the war, he was berating the tank driver to fix the wall for him.
It is amazing. It's truly amazing. I mentioned it, Alan and Michael. We drove a carrier with some other mates. In 2004, we did a trip all the way from the Belgian border right the way up, ending up at Arnhem for the celebrations there. And I cannot tell you how wonderful you'd go. We timed various little celebrations and meetings along the route, and we turn up and we were dressed as proper scruffy old Tommies. We weren't very dedicated reenactors. Well, I certainly wasn't, but we looked the right scruff, and the Dutch people would come up and say, "Thank you for what your fathers did," in all sincerity. Some of them with tears in their eyes. When we drove the carrier up, the children who would obviously the parades. There's lots of parades you take part in, which is fantastic. And the children asked if they could chalk words of hope and other salutations on the carrier, because that's what the children did in 1944. And so we had a load of school kids writing Arnhem with a big arrow pointing obviously the right direction, and good luck Tommy, in a kind of a Dutch accent, scribbled on the side of the carrier as we drove it. And a lot of other vehicle owners would drop sweets and stuff, but we had handfuls of old discharged 303 bullets. So we chucked them out to the kids, and they'd fight over them. It's like, wow, buggers of sweets, I want them bullets.
That's absolutely fantastic.
Happy days.
Absolutely fantastic. You mentioned some magazines as well. What magazines did you read when you were growing up?
So the Orbis publications. Orbis is the publicist, but they were a weekly publication detailing aspects of World War II. They went right through the whole period and went into some post-war stuff. I actually stopped buying them at that point. So issue number 110, I think. Well, I've had enough now. I don't want to know about the wars in Africa at this stage. I wasn't that interested in terms of post-war. But no, that at the time, I think it was over one a week. So you can imagine, over a year, maybe 2 years, they spread them. And of course, my hard-earned pocket money paper round money went to buying such things. And then you would sit and look over them. And of course, those maps, those wonderful maps of like Northern Europe with those big red fingers, a bit like on Dad's army pointing, of the German advance and all that kind of stuff. Brilliant.
Did you ever get into the Commando and battle comics and that sort of thing?
I did read the Commando, but it was the Victor comic for me.
Victor comic, that was the other one. I was trying to think of the other one.
Mum and Dad bought me the Victor comic that used to come, and yes, that was always a firm favourite.
Oh, absolutely superb.
And it ties in with Spike Milligan really, where you've got the comedy pictures in the Victor comic of the German saying Tommy and Hand Hocken, and of course that's what Milligan Spike has drawn on some of his pictures in the books. So it totally resonated with me.
Yeah, brilliant memories. So getting started with the wargaming then, do you remember what that first sort of thing was that got you playing soldiers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a child being bought boxes of Airfix figures, so we never had fireworks. My brother was a bit of a demon, so Mum and Dad would buy me a box or a couple of boxes of Airfix figures as compensation for not having lots of fireworks, which suited me because it was all reinforcements for the campaigns that I would design around the house. So for example, the various rooms would become areas. So the vast sways of Russia would be basically the landing room carpet. The island chain in the Pacific would be the various stairs all the way down. And so as a child, I'd plan in great detail these campaigns, unpainted figures at the time, and fight these battles in the mind with all these lovely figures. And then, of course, as summer came, we would consider invasion of various flower beds in Mum and Dad's garden. And with, of course, that way you could use the wonderful Airfix ships on the grass, because the whole line was kind of hidden a little bit as they sat on the grass. So we're talking age of 8, 9, maybe 10, getting into 11, and then really discovering drawing maps and making my own counters. We mentioned board games a little bit there, so board games always played a part in my gaming. And then to discover that actually I'm not the only one who did this, who actually sat at home drawing maps. It was a bit like discovering this book at school with all these wonderful armour tables and the tank battles in miniatures. Like, oh my God, someone else does this with things, with models. And so you gradually widen the circle of people you talk to about it, and then you find others who play, and that really just opened up the floodgates to me.
Yeah, fantastic. And do you remember the first kind of proper rules that you used?
Well, I think it was because photocopying wasn't as easy to come by back in the early
Yeah.
70s. So I managed to purloin this copy that this kid had got of the Tank Battles and Miniature at the afternoon at lunchtime, and said, I'll give it back to you at the end of school. And so throughout every class that afternoon, I just hand wrote all the tables into my
Oh,
notepad. Didn't
fantastic.
listen to the maths or the geography and the other things. I was just, no, these tables and these other rules. And that then obviously became the basis. I went home and managed to then find a copy in the library, lovely local library that we used to have, and was forever being fined for not returning my book because
Yeah.
I'm a very slow reader, Ken. I'm sort of back when I was at school in the 70s, you were just called thick. Now it's got dyslexia and all the various other ologies to go with it.
Yeah.
But back in the 70s, I was a bit considered thick, but just a slow reader. And so those books again were just eye opening.
Yeah.
Eye opening.
And I've got to say, I love an armour penetration table. I love a bit of detail in my rules.
Yeah.
It's been washed away by all these other people, but I'm out there saying detail in your game, detail in your game.
Yeah. There's almost a bit of nostalgia to actually, want to. I've still got. I managed to get copies of those books over the various years, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. And occasionally, there you come out and thumb through them and think, "Oh, look at that! Oh,
Oh,
rubbing of the knees vigorously." So there's still a nostalgia attached, but I don't think I'd probably use them now for gaming.
yeah. We still harp to them a little bit, and
Yeah,
use them a little bit in our rules, and I do still enjoy it. But I'm an engineer, so that's where I come from. And as I've said on other shows, if I've spent 4 hours building and painting a tank, I don't want someone to destroy it with a 1d6 roll. I want a
no,
bit of work. I want you to sweat to destroy my tank.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And at least if you put a hole in it, you may not knock it out. You may just knock it out partly.
Yeah,
So I do like rules that actually one vehicle isn't just completely killed. You can knock it back, reduce its fighting capability,
yeah.
etc.
Bit of detail.
Yeah,
Bit of detail. Lovely.
yeah.
That's what we like to see. So, have you got a setup at home for gaming?
Well, I have now. So the studio I'm sitting in, man cave studio,
Mm.
studio for tax reasons, man cave for
Yeah.
other things. So I claimed all the building costs with my accountant.
Don't blame you.
I built it. I've lived on the island now for 3.5, coming up 4 years, and it was the last big build on the list really. And anyone who's been to this part of the island, it's not very many flat places, so I had to build a platform onto which to build it. So it's 27 square meters,
Wow.
so within permitted
Mm.
development for building. Um, bifold doors all the way along the front. I think you've seen the view out the front
Amazing.
there. It's
Absolutely amazing.
across the channel. We get some great visitors. Quite often the Navy will come past and wave at us, and we've had 2 already today. 2 Spitfires fly past.
Fantastic.
So during the nice weather, we always get Spitfires coming past. So gaming really isn't here, although I do use it for work as well. So, for example, all my photography that I do is done up here. More and more now, we're starting to use the figures in games and actually take pictures of those games and start to use
Oh,
those more.
brilliant.
That was always the goal, always the goal. And I'd had a games room before this one, and so when I built this one, what went inside it was done with a lot more consideration. So, for example, Alan and Michael have got just the most splendid wargaming rooms you can
Yeah.
imagine, and I asked them what would they change if they had the chance. What things would they change now? Because as you build them, you tend to use what's available, or you buy shelves specially. And one thing was really, well, put something in place, but live with it for a month or so. See if you like it there. Don't go fixing it to the wall at that
Mm.
point. And one thing I also did, and I'll point the camera at it so you can see what I'm talking about. Can you see the
Oh,
architect's
yes.
drawers?
Yeah. All the old plan drawers.
So that's it. Yeah. So there's a big set of architect's drawers. Now they're mounted on a platform which is on wheels, and above that is an 8 foot by 4 foot table space, which can unfold and
Yeah.
double. The plan draws are all there because within those there are preset games, board
Oh,
games.
brilliant.
They're already
Yeah.
set up. So all you do is you pull the drawer out, put it on top of the table, play your turns, put it back again.
Fantastic.
And all around the edges are shelving where all the lovely terrain, trees, woods, mats that I've painted and sprayed are all displayed. So it's lovely to have that terrain out on the table when you're playing with it. But actually, when you want a bit of inspiration, just glance across and actually you can see it all on display
Yeah.
still. Not in the context of a table, but it's all there ready to come off the shelf and be used. So after a lot of consideration of where things were, I put them in place, live with them for a bit, and then fix them to the wall. I'm still work in progress. There's still a little area that needs fixing and painting. Behind me, you can see the illuminated glass
Yeah.
shelves for terrain and models and various other bits and pieces and board games. So, or they're books actually, but so see moving the camera. There we go. So there's board games, and again, being a board game collector, I always love looking at the artwork. It's a bit like the boxes of figures and games that you buy. So rather than have them end on, I'd rather have them with the pretty side out. So he's like, oh, I fancy a game of Axis and Allies today. Oh, look, there it is. He's winking at me. Let's go and play it. So,
Oh,
yeah.
fantastic. And you mentioned being part of the Enfield Club earlier on. What was have you got a club? Is there a gaming scene on the Isle of Wight? Is there a club there or?
Well, there's a quite an active little club in Sandown, but unfortunately they're mainly into Blood Bowl and non-historical gaming. So there are a couple of guys in there who do play historical games, but we've been down there a couple of times and to take a board game, historical game, but it's now got this up here. Plus there's a bar next door. It's kind of like, do we really want to drive down there? Do you know what? Let's go up top. Let's go up to the man cave, have a beer, and so there are other gamers. There's another manufacturer on the island as well. So he's been here for a couple of games as well in the past. So now I've really started to get the studio how I want it. The idea is to play more games up here. But the first 3.5 years of moving the business and rebuilding a home took priority.
So
now time to enjoy it.
This podcast goes out worldwide, so just explain to people who might not be that familiar, the Isle of Wight. Where is it? How big is it, etc. Just so people get an idea.
Okay, well, the Isle of Wight is the very southern part of England. So if you find Southampton, it's kind of just below that, Southampton and Portsmouth. I believe it's 17 miles across by 15 miles deep. It's a bit like a diamond shape. So if you put your finger and thumbs together and create a diamond in front of you, your right-hand thumbnail will be exactly probably where we are. So we're right down in the bottom right-hand corner. And although I'd been here a few times on holidays, moving here was quite a big thing. So I didn't know anybody. I haven't got any family or anything here, but it really is just the most amazing part of the British Isles. It's an area called the Undercliff. So the Undercliff is basically Europe's oldest landslip. So that part of the island 10,000 years ago fell down. So behind me there is a sheer rock face. At its highest point, it's about 600 feet high. At the lowest point, at the one end of the Undercliff, it's a couple of 100 feet high. And then this piece of landslip below it, a mile wide by about 7-8 miles long. It gets the sun all day from the very start of the day to the very end of the day. It's protected from most of the prevailing winds that come around the point of the Isle of Wight. So it has a microclimate, which I didn't realize till I moved here. So effectively it's 5 degrees or more warmer in the winter all year round. And in the summer, it's never super hot because we've got constant onshore breeze from the cooling ocean. So again, in England, my neighbours grow bananas outside in the garden. My new dog's chasing all the lizards. There's been lizards everywhere. It's not it's a bit, and some of the plants that grow here, like something out of Avatar.
Yeah.
I had no idea what they're called or what they do.
Yeah.
Some of them prick you, some don't. You have to find out really, because I've just never seen them before growing up as a kid in England. So this wonderful little place called the Undercliff. When we came here, what struck me was the light, the quality of light for work. And it's no surprise that many artists actually made their time working here, because the quality of the light, you get the sun all day, but because it's kind of down on the ocean then and back up again, the reflective light, it's hard to describe unless you actually ever come here. It's a wonderful part of this world. So happy to have discovered it. Everyone in Venter is so laid back. It's a bit like the Caribbean, really. You know, lunchtime, well, yeah, maybe a couple of hours that we'll get there.
Yeah.
It's really, really laid back, and everyone, for the most part, is just so friendly.
Absolutely fantastic. Now, we always talk about favourite periods and scales and rules and stuff, and you did cover that in the first bit, and we'll talk about it when we're talking about early war miniatures as well. But you did mention something that we've got to go back to, and that's big ships and torpedoes and depth charges. So,
Oh yeah, well, okay, so people of a certain age may well remember, I think it was Benson and Hedges, that advert where the chap's sitting there with smoking his pipe in the pike, and these horrible little kids are running their race boat around on the park, chasing the ducks. And he very kindly leans down under and picks up his remote control unit whilst smoking his whatever it was. And then the submarine comes to life and torpedoes this boat.
Yes, I do, yeah.
Okay, well, I saw that and thought, I want to do that. And being an apprentice in training tectonics and engineer myself, I discovered the world of remote control boats and submarines that actually dive remote control. I said 1/72nd scale and 1/32nd scale. So my Type 7 German U-boat, which I started with, was just over 6 foot long. So it's quite a sizable model. And I thought, I've got to make this via a torpedo. It's just got to be done. And so doing various things that you do, and you're driven in such a way, I made it via torpedoes. And consequently, I mean, these torpedoes were electric. They would just run. There was a little on-off button in the nose, which would be the contact point, which obviously once it hit something, it would stop and then come to rest and sit like a fishing float just above the water. And a number of times I'd kind of been hot pursuit at submerged with my periscope just showing or just below, and then creep up on other people's boats, especially sailing boats, because they're great, because when they turn into the wind, they stall mostly. Yeah. And I only had a single forward firing and a single rear firing at that time, torpedo. And that was fair game for me. It's a bit like wargaming, really, on your local boating lake. And most people they saw the funny side of it. I thought, I never thought I'd see that. And they all talked about that advert. You know, are you that bloke with who smoked his cigar and blew them kids up? No. And of course, such things were when in conversation with Alan and Michael, who also sort of a bit pyromaniacs, a bit like me in some way, in a very small, controlled way. And we would do such things. And then I, of course, had to create a torpedo that would explode on contact.
Yes, of course.
So by using a magician's flash powder, basically, I won't go to the details of making it, you can make a really nice big flump when it made contact. And so rather than switching the motor off when the torpedo head hit the model boat, it would actually switch the charge and set it off and create a nice big splash up the side of the boat. So absolutely fantastic. And that was only ever done for controlled displays, really.
Yeah.
I did miss the target once and hit the side of this chap's swimming pool and took a tile off of his pool, which wasn't very well received. But then, of course, once you've got model submarines, you really, and I was really into the Battle Atlantic and submarine warfare, both from the Allied and German perspective. You had to build an escort. So I built a wonderful escort boat, again, similar scale. It was about 4.5 foot long, I think. And that was made to have fire a charge, 3 pattern depth charges, 2 off the side, 1 rolled off the back. Just a little bit of air. You could switch an air cylinder and actually just push them off the side. And of course, the cup that held them would fall away, a bit like the Mark 9 depth charge did.
Yeah.
And then by the careful use of certain chemicals, you could set it to go off quickly or slowly.
Oh, wow.
And the detonation would be only the size of a tennis ball, I suppose. But of course, I didn't realise, having read on science, that explosions underwater are 5 times more effective than above the water. And so it had a lovely effect. And one of my great memories is going to the Wembley, when the Model Engineer exhibition was at Wembley, and even at the other place in London as well, which I can't remember now. And we would have a boating pool. And so being a keen member and very popular with the torpedoes, and then to drive the Corvette, the pool was only about 1.5 foot deep, so not very deep. And then, of course, fire these depth charges off over the top of a submarine that was sitting there waiting, and then see the little puffs of water that would come up. Absolutely fantastic. And again, this hobby is one of those things, not the model submarines, but just wargaming, brings you into contact with people you would never normally meet in life. And a gentleman called Carl Warnig was one of those people. Carl Warnig was an electrician on U-809, German submarine. He spent his he obviously surrendered at the end of the war, one of the lucky ones to survive, was made prisoner of war. And he said he came from East Germany and didn't want to go back to East Germany, so he ended up opting to stay in England. And he was a prisoner of war for 2 years. And he said, if you ever walk around Hyde Park, all those trees around the edges, me and my mates planted those when we were prisoners of war. And not only was he full of stories like that and many more, he would have a klaxon, an old, like a U-boat type klaxon. And I'd nod at him, and he'd see the Corvette coming in over the target, sitting in the port. I'd nod at Carl, and he'd wave. He'd be wearing his U-boat cap, and he'd hit the klaxon, big smile on his face, obviously bringing back old memories. And I'd drop these depth charges off the top, off the side, and off the back of the Corvette, and we'd get the explosions. And most times the submarine would surface, and everybody would clap and stuff.
Yeah.
But one time I got it too good. I actually dropped one of these charges right on the upper deck of the model submarine. And of course, once they're off and gone, you can't stop them. They're going to go pop, and it went bang, and the submarine didn't come back up. So we had to wade into the pool and pick it up. It didn't destroy it at all, but what it did was it shook all the terminals off the battery and just killed it. So yeah, we've got one confirmed sinking there, I think. That counts.
Well, I hope there's a little submarine painted on the side of the Escort, just with a red line
It's
through it.
sadly gone to another
Has
home
it?
now. I have managed to keep one of my model submarines. I'm kind of looking at it now. It's a 1/32 scale version of or model of a U-class submarine, HMS Upholder.
Yep.
For those who know the submarine history, Commander Wanklin's boat, first VC in a submarine, the Mediterranean campaign. And that in its day was converted to 4 forward-firing, bubble-free ejection system torpedoes.
No.
So you can imagine I caused havoc with that.
Yeah. Yeah, this is plenty of fun to be had with that for sure. That's an amazing story. We always like to finish this first part of the show with the Venn diagram of wargaming, and that's just a little bit of a way of sort of defining your wargaming personality, and that's breaking things down into wargamer, painter, collector, and historian. And different people have different ways that they look at the hobby, and this kind of helps to describe how people do. So where do you see yourself in that collection there, Paul?
Oh, okay. Well, I firmly sit within the historian and wargamer. I do paint. I've not had as much time as I would like these days, but I do paint. Many of the models I've got, I have done myself over the many years. And collector, I do collect. Unfortunately, the Vickers gun behind me is something, but that comes with, when you're into military vehicles and collecting such things, you tend to gather certain apparel like that, and some of it stays. So historian, absolutely. What I'm driven by is the history. And the need to convert it into miniature, really, to turn a subject that you read about and get excited about. So I don't know whether now is a good time to tell you about my wonderful World War II adventure, which started when I moved here.
On.
Okay, so I'll keep it brief because it's hours in itself. So on one of our pre-trips coming here in December 2016, the local paper would all be a firm favourite thing to buy once you arrive on the island. And we had a motorhome, so we'd stay in the motorhome. And on the front of this little paper was "Germans invade Isle of Wight radar station." I thought, well, that's got my interest straight away. I need to read that. And at the same time, it was obviously there'd been a book released by a local author called Adrian Searle, Isle of Wight historian. And in his book, he proposed and gave evidence for that the Germans raided a British radar station at St. Lawrence,
Wow.
which happened to be literally the next bay from where I was staying. And where I am right now, it's just 2 bays away. You could walk it in 10 minutes. And so I read the book in very rapid fashion and thought I've got to go to this site because I know exactly where he's talking about. But the book is short on many details. It's great on the kind of bigger picture story, but it doesn't go into a lot of detail. And from, I guess, my background knowledge, people I know, I kind of got quite a tactical head. You look at a piece of ground and think, well, that's a very obvious covered approach. That's a very obvious point of entry. And I went to this site with my metal detector on the footpath. And my partner was with me, Lydia, my dog, and I found stuff that just shouldn't be there. And I got very, very excited, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Moist is not the word. So in short, the radar station is, the parts of it are still very visible. They're not overgrown so much now. And so from a tactical perspective, I thought, well, that's a really good point to be. Let's kind of have a look there, and went straight there and found a cache of 11 discharged bullets of German nature.
Wow.
I say German nature because if you know anything about firearms and bullets, British 303 have got a very, very big kind of wide plate on the bottom of them, and German bullets have got like a groove cut in the side, which is both are used for the extractor to extract the bullet. And I found 11 of these bullets which had the German extractor. Now, they were all just below the worst cow poo you can imagine, cow pizza. So, and in very bad ground. So they were very rotted and they were very mucky. But I called Lydia and she came over and we videoed the extraction because I thought, I found the smoking gun to this book. There's a load of German bullets here. And where I found them, you can't shoot at anything. There's nothing, you can't see out to sea really. You can't see the radar station. You're in a bit of a dip. Anyway, long story short, on that particular start of the adventure, we took them back, we cleaned them over the period and discovered that they were American bullets. So they were from a Springfield rifle, which is, if you've ever seen Dad's Army, they're holding a rifle. That's the P-17 German designed, or American designed based on the German Mauser, hence the bullets look the same. So I was quite disappointed that these weren't German bullets. But when I spoke to a couple of people who were serving and ex-serving soldiers, they pointed out, well, yeah, but they shouldn't be there. If a home guard person has discharged 11 rounds, that's basically only five bullets in a magazine. So you've discharged it, re-strip clipped it, fired it again, and fired one more. It's pretty serious if you discharge a weapon and don't bring back the spent rounds with a very good reason as to why you've discharged them. You'll be in a lot of trouble. So it kind of, the story went from, I found the smoking gun to, actually, no, they're American, to, well, they shouldn't be there. So many trips back, many visits later, lots of research. I've met various people who gave testimony in the book in the local area. And we've now progressed this World War II adventure, because that's what it is. There can't be many adventures left now in the 2020s of an unsolved World War II mystery. So I sit firmly on the fence of, I wouldn't say they've landed or they didn't land, but there's an awful lot of stuff that I've found there since that should not be there.
Wow.
And by doing lots of research, finding who had the motive, which unit would have carried it out, when they carried it out, where they landed, definitely found where they've landed. We've now got a professor involved who I showed him all the evidence, the finds and various other things. And he used the phrase, we have a plausible heritage scenario.
Oh, like that. That.
Yeah. Well, it's the kind of the kind of words that are used by academics and stuff. He said, well, I shall write to English Nature and get you permission, because this definitely warrants a further limited ground investigation.
Wow.
So we're working with the landowner, which I hope to see and talk to quite soon. The local aviation museum are all over it. They think it's fantastic that such a World War II story may break, and of course it's part of their heritage, and they want to display all the finds and other things in the museum. So I even led a little battlefield study tour here in December. We had 36 engineer Commando Regiment. It's not Commando, sorry, 36 Engineer Regiment, not Commando, 36 Engineer Regiment. So came over, 11 of them, which included commissioned officers, non-commissioned officers, warrant officers, and ordinary ranks. And they had the whole story. We went and walked the ground and actually asked them to contribute because they're trained, young trained men, fit, active, all the things I'm not. And they'd seen the story. They saw where the things were found. I told them the scenario that I think had happened from the findings. I mean, you don't go firing a live Bren gun directly at an RAF working station, for example. And you don't go throwing hand grenades around the working RAF station. Well, all the fragments of those things are there. So, and I asked for their perspective, and certainly the officers and warrant officers. Now, you're used to tasking men. That's the objective over there. This is where I think you've come in. How easy? I mean, I'm 60 and I can climb up the cliff there. You guys will shimmy up in no time. In fact, a lot of them did do. They went, jump down it and climb back up again just to show how easy. And they brought things to the table that I'd never even thought of.
Fantastic.
From a military perspective. So, for example, there's certain features in the ground which offer you the opportunity of very good night navigation. They're features you can follow at night. The background noise of the water covers up movement. So they added things and many other things to the storyline, which we're gathering together now, and hope to present once we've got these findings, and either have evidence to say, well, yeah, there's more evidence to say it did happen than it didn't. That's a very, very compressed version of 5 years of my World War II adventure.
That's absolutely fascinating to hear that, Paul. That's an amazing story, and it would be, I think, quite a big story if it could be shown that the German troops were on British soil in, when did you say, 43? Did you say
43? Yeah. Well, the provisional date that's given is the night of the 15th, 16th of August, 1943. In fact, part of the evidence that the author found was, and it's still in the Isle of Wight archive, where the ARP reported, I'll quote, Germans spotted in dinghies off of Ventnor, use usual precautions or follow usual precautions. So somebody spotted Germans in dinghies and reported it, and it survived in the archive. And the Isle of Wight is a very small place, Ken. I didn't really realise this till I moved here, but most people know what other people are doing, and not in a nasty, nosy, poisonous neighbour way, but rumours spread rapidly. And again, one of the people who gave evidence in the book is a local man, and he remembers them all talking about it. Lots of local people in the day when the book was written remember it, and their attitude is, well, we know it happened. What's the big deal? And of course, the author's book is Churchill's last wartime secret, because Churchill made a boast that no German jackboots would ever land on the mainland of England or the United Kingdom. And of course, this would, in some small way, breach that. And I don't think that's a serious issue at all. And Churchill was a ginger, so he can't be that bad a fellow, can he? He's not going to be that upset about it now. So.
Exactly. Well, that's fun. That's fun. And of course, if they're in dinghies, they've not dinghied from the coast of France, have they?
U-boat.
So yeah, exactly,
U-boat.
exactly. Yeah. So, have you fascinating story? Is there anything on the German side? Is there any records survived that might suggest that this raid took place?
Well, again, the reason it came to light, again, it's just a fascinating story with involving the German Abwehr, which is like our MI5, the military version. So yes, there is a German who gave testimony, and he died unfortunately. He's a highly respected archivist, renowned, won awards, written numerous books. His work in the preservation and making accessible historical archives is what he's known for. This man gave testimony because there were no records surviving in German records, and any follow-up that was done over here was met with nothing happened. So I think when you grow up and your entire life is dedicated to the preservation of history and archives, when you participated in something personally and everyone is saying to you, no, it didn't happen, that's what really tipped his hand to actually not going public, but he certainly shared his story, both with the author of the book, but also with a local gentleman called Fred Lawrence, who lived in St. Lawrence, whose former name was Alfred Lomnitz, who worked with the American intelligence. It was a deep hole here. You need a whole new podcast for this one, mate, because it involves U-boats, the German Abwehr, German commandos, English-speaking commandos whose previous experience had been in North Africa, penetrating Allied lines. And I could go on. Hence
Amazing.
why I ticked the historian box initially, because it excites me. It massively excited me. And to have this on my doorstep and then to find evidence to suggest that, yes, something certainly did happen, then, yeah, great. And I'm just enjoying riding the adventure, whichever way it turns out.
Oh, lovely. Well, we'll have to have you back on in the future to keep us updated on this, Paul. It's a fascinating story and so much more to find out, as you say.
My pleasure.
Lovely. Well, we'll draw an end to the first section of the podcast there, and we'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, in a minute for our little big game chat. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. A fascinating story there from Paul about a German raid on the English coast in 1943, and I'm sure we're going to all look forward to hearing updates on that in the future. That's an absolutely amazing story. Big games is what the podcast is all about, and we always have a little chat with our guests to see what their thoughts are on the subject. So, first question that everyone gets, Paul, is how would you define a big game? What does a big game mean to you?
Big games for me, Ken, are where you get a number of good mates over, normally over a weekend, at least over a very long Saturday. Nice big table, and yeah, lots of fun, basically. Lots of banter, and enjoying all the miniatures and the scenario that you've come up with and you want to play.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, I think that's a classic definition, and one we're all happy with here. You mentioned earlier on seeing some big games very early on in your wargaming history, do you think that had an effect on how you see wargaming?
Well, initially, again, sort of thinking back to that moment, it was just the sheer spectacle, and seeing people just hovering around the table. It wasn't a spectacularly well attended from a public perspective. It was in a big hotel, had a big function room, effectively, and I'd never seen so many figures on such a big table, and the people involved were just so into it. They really were into it, and very happy to share what they were doing with you. That, and so that excitement, well, other people, you can catch it. You catch that excitement, and even though it was a subject I wasn't that interested in, I think it was a big fantasy battle. But just the spectacle of all the miniatures and all the terrain and the lovely castle at the end, for example, amongst other games. There were historical games there as well. That was part of the eye-opening for that weekend.
And do you think, because some people, will say to me that they see something like that and they're put off by it. They think that they can't manage to reach that size of a game. Whereas personally, I find it an inspiration. So what did that game bring to you? Did it drive you on to do something similar?
Or I think it must have done. It must.
Yeah.
I can't exactly recall that direct correlation, but it has to. I think, like you, I fall on the side of it being inspirational. Yeah. Yes, you could look at it and go, "Oh, I could never do that." Well, that's one way of looking at it, but actually, let's look at the positive side. Go, look how fantastic that is, and talk to people who did it. They started off small at some point. They didn't get all these figures together and miniatures together in one big go. They did it over a period of time, typically with the collaboration with other people, and that's a wonderful thing about our hobby, isn't it? That you can collaborate and you can take part in something, even if it's a period you don't know. If you've been given a command of, say, a brigade at the end of the table, you can still delight and enjoy that enormously.
I think the collaboration is an amazing part of it, and getting together a group of people to do and work on one project it's a great way of making friends, of just enjoying the hobby more than just a 2-hour game on a table. It expands it out into so many different areas.
Oh yeah, totally.
So what's if you ever think back, what would be some of the big games that you've played in the past that you've enjoyed and you remember?
Well, in recent years, with moving and doing the work here, most of my all of my big games have been really with Alan and Michael at their wonderful games room.
Mm,
Yeah, they've just done some spectacular games there. Those two boys are so talented. You know that. They don't need to
yeah.
say that, but the tables that they put on and the thoughts behind some of the games. Alan runs these most magnificent campaigns. I really wish I lived near Nottingham at times because to take part in those. But when they needed a spare commander just to command a part of this campaign that's been built up to this moment where troops have entered the table, and you've seen them publish. Alan publishes pictures, and Michael published pictures on their store anyway. So yeah, just fantastic. Great tables, great subjects. Playing a part in a bigger campaign, of course, has its own pleasures. It makes you a little bit more tentative, even though they're not your figures or your troops. You don't just want to throw them away,
Yeah.
especially with the person whose army is standing next to you. You're one of your best mates, like Mr. Cowan, who says, "Don't you waste those cavalry. I need them for the campaign." So yeah, you're a little bit more cautious with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, big games like that. Before I moved, I had a pretty good wargame room there, and Alan and Michael came and Chris came to games there, and that was a big World War II game over a desert terrain. So I very often sprayed my own mats. So painters, decorators, matting is really good if you spray it and texture it. Again, back to I did those 20 odd years ago, and so yeah, I think the table was something like 20 odd foot long by 8 foot wide, and obviously roaming hordes of tanks and other things around. And of course, everyone thinks of the desert to be a really bare piece of terrain. It's quite the opposite. Of course, there are tracts of open sand, but there's so many different terrain features within a desert, and yeah, some can be used to help. Ground is never that flat, so finding a hold down position, etc. So yeah, that's big games really in the sense with figures. Of course, there are big games with board games. So I've been very lucky in having a number of people here to play. And that same kind of, I'm going to do this game this weekend or this day, and it's going to be a good 5-6 hours. So it may involve a curry at the end of it,
Oh, of course.
and a few beers. Fantastic.
So the board games that you play, are they like the traditional Avalon Hill SPI type games with counters for battalions, or something like a Twilight Imperium? I don't know if you've seen that, or some of the more traditional games, I suppose, that are games rather than
Yeah.
war games.
Well, I think again going back to discovering it, the SPI produced Napoleon's Battles, the quad series of
Yes,
Waterloo,
classic.
Quatre Bras, and
Yeah.
Wavre, and I was like, oh my god, that was fantastic. But I think I've moved on a lot from that time. So I think I said to you in the preamble, there was some of the glorious maps. Some of these maps that they've created. So one of my favourites is Race to the Sea, which features obviously northern France, Belgium, and it talks about, or the game is really about the Battle of the Marne's finished, the Germans in retreat, and everyone's racing to create a trench line up to the coast. Well, that map, which is only I think about 30 inches long by 20 wide, I've blown that up to something like 5 foot by 4 foot, and which means the hexes, of course, are quite sizable. They're a good sort of 3-4 inches across, and rather than counters, actually using miniatures.
Oh, brilliant.
So there's nothing better than seeing your British infantry, the small BF, as it were, with the cavalry represented as figures, and the counters actually standing behind it. So actually hidden from the opponent because they can't see the factors on it, but they know it's British because there's a British soldier there. So taking some games like that and blowing up the map, making it more eye candy to look at, really easier for other people to participate in. And any subject from one of my favourite ones at the moment is Mrs. Thatcher's War, which is the Falklands campaign by White Dog Games. Other ones, some of the Axis and Allies series, Guadalcanal being my absolute favourite. I think hundreds of times that's been played. Victory at Sea, naval games. I know you love your naval games. You must have come across War at Sea.
Yes, classic.
Haven't put miniatures on that yet, but it's kind of begging for it really. There'll be a blooming lot of them. And of course, submarine games. Now, of course, they're a bit difficult because submarines mostly operate submerged, but it's still possible. Still possible. So it's kind of a hybrid, really. It's miniatures, but in a board game setting, but done big, which I know the subject about big games. Kind of, you can wedge it into that category. I think.
Yeah, definitely. Did you ever see the U-boat game? It must have been 2 or 3 years ago that had an app with it as well, and you had the board was the U-boat itself, and you had crew members that you moved around in 3D, and then you had a map that you would plot your position on. Have you got that game?
I haven't got that game. No, I did look at it. I did kind of think maybe, but it didn't tick enough boxes for me personally. In terms of again, the Battle Atlantic, both the Allies and the German side, and submarines being a fascination. Steel Wolves, which I've never really played, but I just get it out and look at the counters because they're just so lovely. And the other one, which is the Battle Atlantic, which is a folio game, so it's quite small, but it's one of those games you can finish in 3 hours. So I had my stag night on a submarine. I've mentioned that, worth mentioning it at all. But there used to be a Russian submarine on display down by the Thames Barrier, and I sweet talked the guy who managed it and dropped him 500 quid, and he let me have it for the night with all my mates. And we got rather pissed on
it. Fantastic! What a night!
All dressed as silly buggers as well. We were dressed in fancy dress, and my former missus used to be involved in the costume house in London, and so we borrowed certain costumes, which has come up a few times with various stag nights. We had the submarine for the night, and got very tiddly. Managed not to fall off it.
Excellent. So. Probably a good job there was no charge in the batteries and you weren't able to get it out to sea.
No. The only casualty was, of course, the door to one of the heads opened both ways.
Oh, dear.
And as one of my mates was just clambering off the throne, another one barged in and the door smacked him right on the corner of the eyeball. Oh. And, there's a bit of claret. But that was the only injury, that and sore heads in the morning.
That's not
one of my first and only times I've drunken Russian gold vodka.
Oh, never again. You mentioned a couple of times, and this kind of is proper big war games. Is you mentioned having a tag and the Brennan carrier with the Perries as well. So have you known the Perries for a while? You seem to have been around them a bit.
Yeah, I'm not purposely name dropping, but they do have played and do play a big part in my wargaming and what I do today. So I first met them through getting into reenactment. So that's kind of big gaming, really, 1-to-1. And there's a nice little thread here which we'll follow through, if you will. We used to meet on part of the old Barnet battlefield at the ye old Monkenholt pub. Barnet being, of course, a big battle in the War of the Roses. And two there actually. Well, one there, one in St Albans, two in St Albans. And we'd meet there, and I got brought into the whole let's go and dress up as people and do silly things in costume. And I'll give it a go. I'm a pretty game sort of fella. And anyway, I went along to my first training muster, which was organised, and I didn't really have any kit. So Michael very kindly lent me his beautifully made Murray and Azure, red and blue doublet. And on the last day of training, and there was people training with weapons and running around this beautiful about 20 acres in the middle of South England, and no other civilization around. So around the campfire, drinking lots, telling stories. I like this. And then we got to Sunday afternoon, and we're having the last kind of pitch battle. We're chasing each other around this woodland, and I'll probably be inappropriately using this spear. But anyway, this chap who I found out later was a razor sharp rapier. He stuck it in the top of my arm and it came out the other side. That did hurt mightily. And of course, poor old Mr. Perry's brand new doublet became ruined in a way. And I got to spend the night in Poole Hospital with a very apologetic chap coming to see me at the bedside. It was all right. It just felt like someone really gave me a dead arm punch, and then it burned. So being stabbed with a sword not the best experience, but I've had it and I can tell you about it. Anyway, the funny thing is that doublet, which obviously came out and was the many a tale at many events in years following, has ended up on display at Games Workshop.
Wow.
And here's the story. So they have a wonderful, where they call it a conferencing room or games room, that's got the most wonderful medieval painted walls and textured wall coverings. And hanging on one of those displays is that their doublet. And I'm sure people look up and go, cool, that blood looks real. Well, it bloody is. It was mine. It's mine. That's just a funny story. I think Alan and Michael used, because they designed all of that, and they obviously got some of the props and didn't want to carry on carrying the doublet around anymore. So I got into reenactment, which was really splendid. I got to play with and learn to shoot longbows, chasing each other around castles and doing various other things, learning about medieval history, a lot more about the Wotheroses, which I didn't know much about when I got involved. And over many years, meet some of the most wonderful people and go to some of the most wonderful places with reenactment. And a little story that comes to mind is that I had the pleasure and fortune to be in charge of, at the 500th anniversary of the Battle of Stoke Field, the 1487 one, being in charge of the Oxford battle. So Oxford, with his vanguard, with a mixture of bows and bills, and we combined lots of groups together to kind of create this thing. And I was given the honour and pleasure of leading this thing. And although it's reenactment and it's pretend, it still does teach you the difficulties involving controlling large bodies of men. And my opponent on top of the hill was the so-called Swiss mercenaries, who were basically English Civil War pikemen and handgunners, led by none other than Mr. Stallard, bless him. I know. And so there was I, advancing with the Oxford battle, lobbing loads of bows into his formation and him popping off guns at us. And the clash of pike and bills, although we'd practiced it the day before, was still a really good spectacle and bloody great fun, I have to say. You get bumps and bruises doing these sort of things. And we laughed about it afterwards. It was a great thing to do. So having met John as the commander of the so-called Swiss mercenaries at the Battle of Stoke Field, so that's pretty big one-to-one gaming. It's of course we're going back to the 80s, so it's not the kind of numbers you see now in reenactments, but even so, back then it was still quite a spectacle. And when you're facing that many pikemen who all want to kind of stick their pike in you, that's not very nice, I'll tell you. Even though you're covered in harness, and back then, of course, I was quite young and fit. And anyone who's got the wonderful book, The Medieval Soldier by Jerry Embleton, you'll see some lovely pictures in there of soldiers from the late medieval period that were photographed by Jerry of the Company St. George, but also the White Company. So you'll see a lot of pictures of Alan and Michael in there, for example, and other well-known faces from the gaming industry. And the person doing a cartwheel in armour, that's me. When I was young and fit enough to do it. I don't think I can do it now. But
you want that framed on the wall, and I used to be able to do this.
Yeah, well, I think I could do a cartwheel now, but not in armour. It wouldn't fit me. I'm too blooming fat.
So how did you come to pick up a tank then? Because it's not on everyone's shopping list.
No, not at all. Well, I think I said to you, I saw my first tank in 1970 or thereabouts at Shoebury Garrison with my father. It was a Centurion Mark V gun tank. Its sheer presence and the noise and being able to get up in it and look inside. The soldiers very kindly let you have a look inside and even dangled you in if you were small enough. And just wow, So collecting model tanks followed. But of course, in the end of the Cold War, in the late 80s, a lot of military kit became available and affordable. And so I started my collection of armoured cars in 1991, I think it was, a little ferret armoured car. And
ferret.
Ferret, a magnificent thing, and of course, a great fun. I had 4 of them at one time, different versions. I've still got one. I've kept one, and it's on the island. We just built a ferret house for it, actually, a little cover for it. And so, armoured cars progress into other vehicles. And Alan and Michael were pretty keen. I remember when I first got my ferret, I took it up there to where they lived, and in Goffsoak, so not far from where we lived in North London. And we went out for a cabbie in it, and they were like, it's fantastic, just loved it. And we, as we did, Michael would probably be on the Bren gun, leaning out, driving around Epping Forest, and then we'd get inside and be trying to drive on the periscopes, just for the experience. And so Alan and Michael's uncle Ron, who I did meet a couple of times, not for very long, but I did meet him. He was in, I believe, the Sherwood Rangers, World War II, a unit very famous, made more publicly aware by the great book by James Holland on the subject.
Yeah.
And so Uncle Ron was in a Stuart tank, which was called Ism. And so the goal was, from over conversations and beers, let's get a tank. All right, then, let's get a tank. So we got a tank, and we painted it in the colours of the Sherwood Rangers, and we called it Ism.
Yeah.
And we did various things with it, driving it around. I was the only one with a track laying license, so I was the only one who could really sort of drive it on the road without L plates. And of course, later on, Michael lost his arm, so he couldn't really pull on the tillers. And I suppose one of the funniest things that happened was Michael being Michael. He had done some filming with Band of Brothers. If you ever spoke to him, or he did some filming. He was one of the casualties in Band of Brothers, and they made him the most wonderful prosthetic to go over his stump, which basically consisted of lots of bones sticking out and all gore hanging off of it. And
right, yeah.
He did the filming, and he kept it in the fridge and kept it for quite a while. Actually, he'd quite often tease people with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, this time he thought, right, I'm doing something special here. So we were fighting in this battle reenactment where we're very scripted, where we drive, and we had a little charge on the inside, and we were quite near the crowd line, so the charge was on the opposite side of the tank, and we were to drive up to these German fellows and fire the gun at them, and then they would fire a Panzerfaust at us and knock us out, and we'd bail out. Great. And I could see Michael smiling. I think, what's he got up? He's got something lined up. So anyway, the Panzerfaust went off. We went bang, and lots of smoke in the tank. There's all smoke pouring out, and we all try and bail out. Michael dives out, lands on the side of the crowd, waving this prosthetic at them.
Oh.
And it was just like, we were laughing because we knew what he was doing, but a lot of people in the crowd were like, oh my god, what's he done? That's a bit real. And then we just laughed about it afterwards, sort of thing you could do back in the 1990s period. But anyway, we did that. So we did some fun things with it, but it wasn't as easy to move around. I kept it where I used to live on a farm, and I don't know if you've ever started a radial engine. You have to turn it over 50 times to move the oil around, and then when you start it, it's like your own smoke screen, even worse than a Chieftain apparently. And of course, it was okay, but you couldn't start it every weekend because of the smoke and cloud. But anyway, we bought a carrier. We thought, let's buy a carrier, let's sell the tank and get a carrier.
Yeah.
And we got a lovely little Mark II 1944 made Canadian Bren carrier, and which we had a lot of fun with. Really had a lot of fun with it. We pulled a 6-pounder behind it for quite a few times at various shows and festivals. We took it to Holland twice to do the Arnhem run, where, as I said, we met some wonderful people. We even had groupies. We called them groupies. We went to Overloon Tank Museum in Holland, and of course parked the 2 carriers and a dingo in the car park while some of us went into the museum and came out. And there was this old chap and his missus there, sort of, just smitten. And of course we talked to them, and the Dutch people are so friendly. And he said, "Oh, and you live locally. Would you like to come and see my old farm, and I'll show you where the British tanks were and the battle that took place there?" So I'm like, "Well, yes, please." And so we went, we camped on the way, and he met us. He came and had a meal with us one evening with his wife, and we told stories around the campfire. And anyway, we got near to his house, so we went to see his house, and his brother lived there on the farm still. And he said, "I'll tell you a story. This crossroads where we lived was heavily fought over in the October battles after Arnhem. And the Germans were basically fighting for this crossroads, and they were in our house. And the bombardment by the British was so intense that the German soldiers came into the cellar where we as children were and our mum and dad were.
Wow.
And he said, let's go into the cellar. So we went into that
Yeah.
cellar and he told the rest of the story in the cellar.
Fantastic.
It was just amazing.
Yeah.
And he followed us throughout the rest of the route. He followed us all the way along. We met up with him. His name was Moot. I'm sure he's dead by now because he was quite old back then. And just one example of the wonderful people this hobby can bring you into contact with. That, and when we were at 2004, we were in the big parade over Arnhem Bridge, and of course many of the vehicles that take part are owned by Frenchmen, Dutchmen, Germans, many Continentals, and because we were dressed as very, very bloody scruffy Tommies in these 2 carriers and a dingo. And as we crossed the apex, all the veterans back in that day were allowed to sit on the top of like bench seats that arranged for them to pole position on the parade. And we shouted out something to them in English. I went, bloody hell, you're English. I went, yeah. And you know what they all said? You're late. All the veterans shouted, you're bloody late again. So we just looked, just amazing.
Yeah.
Just amazing. Yeah.
Fun.
Happy days with the carrier.
Fantastic.
Very happy. We still got it. It's in a museum on the Isle of Wight at the moment.
Yeah.
Not running at the moment, but with a little bit of work could be made to run again.
Fantastic story.
So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that is proper big gaming, that, mate. That is proper big gaming, without a shadow of a doubt. Well, thank you very much for that, Paul. We'll have another short break now, and then we'll be back with the features section. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back after stories of tanks and medieval reenactment. We are back to the features section, and the first part, as always, is the Yorkshire Gamer quiz. And for those of you out there who get upset very easily, this is not how good a gamer you are; it's how Yorkshire Gamer you are. They're 2 entirely different things. So a good score might be a positive thing, or a bad score might be a positive thing. It's up to you and how you see your gaming. So, are you ready to go, mate?
Yeah, let's do it. I had family in York, by the way. I used to visit York as a child. So, yeah, Auntie Ethel, who lived in York, bless her.
Oh, brilliant. So it's usually one or the other, or yes or no answer. So quite straightforward. And 20 questions. The first one of which is go big or go home.
Well, go big is always the preference. All the reasons we've talked about.
Excellent. Contrast paints, are they great or a gimmick?
I've never used them, so I don't know.
I'll put you down for the
I've never used them.
I'll put you down for the shit.
Okay.
Paintbrushes. Would you choose Reet Posh, Winsor & Newton, or Yorkshire Made Pro Art?
We've been buying Pro Art. Oh, and we have been getting them. I've got them on my shelf behind me, so I can prove it to you. So
brilliant.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. Brilliant. I keep meaning. I'm supposed to be going to the factory, and I keep meaning to get that sorted out. I'll do that this afternoon. So 96 figures. Is that an army or a unit of pike?
Ooh, well, in the big games, it's a unit of pike.
Excellent. 6x4 as a table. Is that a big game or a small game?
That's a small game.
It's a small game. Going well so far. When you're organising a battle, would you prefer points-based or historical order of battle?
Historical every time.
Excellent. Because you did say you did some competition gaming, didn't you?
Once.
Years ago.
Never again.
Never again.
Never again.
Did you say the guy was chasing you around trying to get a rematch because you'd won?
Yeah, he did. He was. I can remember it well because Jed, the umpire, had come over and interrupt because not only was I playing him, I was playing his mate who was sitting there coaching him with the rule book.
Oh, right, okay.
I don't normally complain, but I complained at that point, and Jed told him to put the book away.
Yeah.
And I beat him. I got the trophy. It's still in the cabinet. I don't know where I kept it, but it's still in the cabinet. And he turned up at the club twice. They're saying, I demand a rematch. I'm like, I'm sorry, I've got a game organised with my friend Matthew. Yeah, well, I've come all the way from South London for this. You've got to play me again. You've got to give me a chance. I was like, no, go away. You git. Go away. And he was a short ass. He's classic short ass, stooping chap when he was saying it. I can't forget him, really. So, so I did it once. Clearly, the games were over a period of weeks, leading up to the grand final.
Yeah.
And the first person I played was Kevin Dallimore.
Wow.
And I remember because we spent most of the game talking about how he'd painted all these naked ancient Britons, and about he had lots of. They're all naked, obviously, and they were quite well hung. Some of them, I couldn't help commenting on them, and he told me about how he painted them, and with my salutes kind of dealt with his naked chappies quite quickly, and we spent the rest of the time talking about painting, and so you meet great people, and then you meet gits.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic! What a story. Kevin Dallimore and his naked Brits.
Ancient Britons, yeah.
When you're mixing your paint, do you like a wet palette or an old bit of MDF?
Oh, well, to be honest with you, I just put it on a little pallet, plastic pallet, and when it's dried up, it's gone.
That's good enough for me. When you're undercoating, do you go black or white?
Oh, no, I use grey.
Grey, a bit of a halfway.
Yeah.
It's quite popular, grey, I have to say.
Yeah, Halford's primer undercoat is brilliant.
Oh yeah, I use their black and their white. I use white for horses. So it's hot drink time. Is it Yorkshire tea or a dirty mucky coffee?
Both, and I'll tell you why. we have coffee in the morning in the workshop, and we have Yorkshire tea in the afternoon. That's our routine. Andy, who works with me, he's very particular, and that's what we do. In fact, afternoon tiffin will be probably coming up quite soon, and it will be a cup of Yorkshire tea.
Oh, brilliant! That's what we like to hear. And coffee to get you going in the morning. Then I take, is that the
he loves his coffee. I like coffee. Yeah.
Cool. Did you in the last episode? I was talking to George Nafziger, and he was saying that when he was in the Navy, it was like brewing for 12 or 14 hours, and it just tasted dreadful.
I bet the spoon stood up in that.
Oh dear me. Oh dear. Right. So, question 10. Wargame units. Do you like them tightly packed or socially distanced?
Nice and tightly packed when it's appropriate.
Brilliant. Are we going for a 2-hour club game or a weekend monster game?
Oh, weekend every time if given the opportunity.
Oh, brilliant. Now this could be an interesting one considering your place in the United Kingdom. It's the avocado question. So avocado, is it just posh mushy peas?
I think so. We don't see much of it on the island down here. Garlic is the popular thing. We grow the most amazing garlic in the tropics down here.
Oh, brilliant.
In so much so, we've got a world-renowned Isle of Wight garlic farm.
Fantastic.
And that has a story linked to World War II, if you want to hear it.
Go on, tell me.
Okay, so I only know this because I visit it regularly, and you can read it in all their buff.
Yeah.
So back in World War II, many of the SOE flights were flown from Sandown Airport on the island, which is very close to the garlic farm. And some of the pilots or people working were free French. And their one thing was they missed garlic. They really missed their garlic. So on one of the SOE flights where they land in a field and drop off a person and pick up paperwork, they picked up lots of garlic. They brought it back, and that's the seed bed for the garlic that's grown on the Isle of Wight farm.
Fantastic.
Or one of the many. So yeah, it has a link back to World War II. And you can imagine after the first crop was harvested, they were some very happy Frenchmen.
Brilliant story. I bet nobody's ever snuck in an avocado, have they?
No. I don't know where you'd put it.
No. Dreadful. Anyway, never mind.
Yeah.
Question 13. The universal question so far. No pressure on you here, Paul. Round dice, spherical dice. Are they allowed on your table or banned?
No. What are they thinking? Especially when you hear my 101, you'll understand why I'm so anti that. What was someone think? What were they smoking when they came up with that idea?
That's unbelievable, isn't it? Oops. So 43 episodes, everyone banned.
Yeah.
Somebody
totally.
Somebody brought me a guy called Fraser. I do apologise, I forgot his second name at Salute. He brought me one.
Oh my god.
So
it's like a football.
I have one in the house. So I'm gonna do a funny video on it later on in the year.
Oof.
But thank you, Fraser, for that. That's very kind of him. So down the chippy, are you going to choose haddock or cod?
Oh, cod.
Cod, good word.
Yeah, we've got a really good chip shop here on the Undercliff.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant. Their cod is fantastic.
Oh, that's what we like to hear. Love a bit of cod myself. We mentioned this earlier on. Do you love a good table and a set of rules, like an armour penetration table?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what got me started really, and got me massively excited at the thought of that. So yeah, for nostalgia, absolutely. And there are tables and charts in Chain of Command which we play. So they're there for a reason. They serve a purpose.
Yeah, exactly. You might not get this one. Question 16: 28 mil is king? Yes or no? No.
No, not for me. I grew up with 20 mil, 176, HO scale, 172nd. That's why, 53 years I've been playing with that scale. What can I say?
Yeah, no worries. We'll talk more about scale in the next part of the podcast. But question 17: unpainted miniatures allowed on the table? Yes or no?
No.
Excellent. I think you're not into football, are you? No, I saw a picture.
No.
I saw a picture of you on a Subutio table.
Yes.
Is it Entoyment in Poole?
Entoyment in Poole, yes, indeed. They have a permanent table set up there, and I was with my old school buddy Steve Renwick, who runs Battlezone Miniatures, and he used to play that. I was never into football, and he said, "Come on, let's have a go." So we had a go on the Subutio.
Oh, brilliant!
Table.
I used to play Subutio a lot when I was younger, and I have to say a big shout out to Entoyment as well. We popped in there when we were on holiday on the south coast a few years ago, and it's a great shop. Great shop.
Oh, I wish we had something like that nearer here. To have that as your local store, stroke club room, stroke gaming shop. Oh, they're lucky people there, and Pete and the team there are just brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic place. So, question 18 is a football-related question, and it is Bradford City or Leeds United?
Well, I know from listening to your pot you like Bradford, so if I'm given a choice, I'll stick with the host's choice.
Oh, good lad, well done. Question 19, a Wars of the Roses question. You know a bit about this. So, is it Yorkshire or the other place over the hill?
Now I was always a Lancastrian in the War of the Roses reenactment. I know. What can I say? I was always a Lancastrian. I know the Perries, of course, they were bloody Yorkists. So we'd always have a lot of fun over that subject. But I'm a Lancastrian.
Oh dear, dear me. And the final question is: Games Workshop, are they the work of the devil?
I've heard people talk about this a lot, and I'll fall on the side of the wall that says work of the devil. Only because of their policies about restrictions on gaming and not being able to use miniatures and other things. I think they've done incredibly good things for our hobby, getting kids reading the books, getting the interest. Many people who transition from those subjects into historical come from that initial excitement. So they've done lots of good, but the corporate policies are not healthy for our hobby.
And it's why I stuck it in there. It is a very interesting question, and there are pros and cons to both sides of it, which makes some of the questions that are obvious, like Yorkshire tea or dirty mucky coffee. It's always Yorkshire tea. But with the Games Workshop one, there's it's an interesting way of getting a conversation started. So that's extremely good. Well, you've done extremely well, mate. You've got a couple of half points in there, give you 87.5%, which is very good. Or very.
See, I told you I've got family in Yorkshire, so must be a bit of a correlation there. Good old Auntie Ethel.
Yeah, proper Yorkshire name, Ethel. Right. There we go. So, moving on from the quiz, the next part of the features section is the Wargames Room 101. And if you've not heard the podcast before, this is a section where we get our guests to put something in Wargames Room 101, which is a place where you put your deepest, darkest fears. And as I've said before, I kind of thought that this would only last for 6 or 7 episodes, but we've been going for quite a while with it now, and people just keep coming up with new ones, and I absolutely love it because it's your chance to just get it off your chest and that thing that really annoys you. So, Paul, have you come up with one, mate?
Oh yeah, it was a no-brainer. Bloody dice droppers.
Dice droppers.
And what I mean by that are people who don't give their dice a good roll. When someone's calculating, well, for this you need this factor, and you could see them looking into their hand discreetly, turning the dice in the right direction, and then come the time to throw the dice, they just drop it gently in front of them and go, oh look, I got a 6.
Oh,
Funny that, isn't it?
oh.
So bloody dice droppers, Ken.
Dice droppers.
You know, putting your dice in a cup and giving them a bloody good shake is great fun, because you look on the person's face opposite, you're shaking it, and again, what's he going to get? Oh, I hope he doesn't get a 6, but it's the unknown. Or putting your dice into a dice tower and then see them tumbling out.
Yeah.
That's part of the fun. That's the friction of a game. But bloody dice droppers, they try and twist it and just give a little drop on the table. And it's like, oh, no.
Yeah. That is...
They swiftly get handed a cup and not put them in there and give them a good shake.
That is really, really annoying. I've shown these a few times, but we have these in our Wargames room. And these are like barrels, teak barrels. And this one is from HMS Iron Duke.
Oh, wow.
From the Battle of Jutland. And we've got loads of them behind us. What's this one from? That's from Warspite. And they're
great names.
The funny thing is that sometimes the dice get stuck in the bottom. And if you're not paying attention, you can, roll them out and twice as many dice come out as you thought.
Well, that's fate, though, isn't it?
Yeah, because clearly before they haven't
Yeah.
come out, and you've missed out on that bit. They just happen to come out.
Yeah.
There's no cheating involved. It's just hilarious when it happens. And you look in the bottom, and there's like 5 or 6 dice just stuck in.
Yeah, so there you go, Ken. Bloody dice
droppers.
That's my 101.
Yeah, I've seen that. I haven't seen it for a while, but I do know what you're talking about. So that is a perfect one. Another one to join the vault at Wargames Room 101. And as that closes behind us, we open up our Desert Island Wargame, and this is very similar to Desert Island Discs on Radio 2 now, I think it is. So you're going to be cast away on a desert island, Paul, and you can take a game with you, any game, war game you want, size, etc. Doesn't matter. What would be your ideal game to take?
Okay, it's Mrs. Thatcher's War by White Dog Games. It's a solitaire game, and I've played it many times. Particularly if I was stranded between the months of April and June, which is always a time I get quite reminiscent about the Falklands War. So yeah, no question, that game. Great result every time, very difficult to win. And the story that comes out of the game as you play it is so memorable.
So is it
ticking all the boxes?
Is that one is it a tactical game? Is it a more political game? Or does it work on all the different factors?
Oh, it covers a number of mechanisms. Obviously, politics played a big part in the Falklands War, as did the naval campaign and then the ground campaign. So it splits it into various areas for a very cunning use of like a sequence of play, which again, after the first 3 or 4 goes, you know what it is. So you just kind of intuitively play it. Politics are involved by some random dice rolling in terms of you can get interventions from the UN or the American diplomatic missions that were going on, or all the many subjects that were covered in the Falklands have got a little place in this game. It's really well thought out. I love what Ben Madison, who's the designer, did with the game. It's not perfect, like any game. You could always improve it, but it's great out of the box. It's blooming fantastic.
Excellent. I'll keep an eye out for that. That sounds like a good one. And you're allowed to take a book with you other than a religious book. So what would you take book-wise onto the desert island?
Well, I've actually taken this book onto a desert island, and that's not the reason I've chosen it. But it's an interesting comparison. So the book is by Anthony Mockler, and it's called Haile Selassie's War: The Ethiopian Campaigns, 1935 to 1941. So it's a little paperback book. That wonderful man, Dave Lancaster, pushed it under my nose at a Wargames show, knowing I like such things. And he was absolutely right. It's totally thumbed and been read a couple of times. But each time I read it, I find different things in it. And for anyone who wants to be inspired by interwar gaming or even early World War II, the battles in East Africa, Eritrea, and Abyssinia offer some of the wargaming gold. Anyone who wants to do boys' own stuff, but it's World War II. I mean, the only ever real cavalry charge against tanks, not the made-up one in Poland, actually happened in the Abyssinian War.
Wow.
And it's described in great detail in Anthony's book. And he gives a great description of all the various names and terminology I learned so much. I mean, like Rastafari, the desert island I was on was Jamaica. I went there for a holiday, and I thought I'll take this book because it had the colours of the three rainbow colours on the front, and a number of people who walk past and say, "Well, that's an interesting book," or "That's an interesting book. What's that about?" And the conversations, and I was able to educate even a Rastafarian. Actually, I went to a beach talk by a Rastafarian at this place we were staying, and I listened to him talking. And I said, Haile Selassie, because you keep talking about him. That's not his name, that's his title. I was like, oh, what do you mean? I said, well, his real name was Tafari Makonnen. And he got called Raz Tafari because Raz is the Ethiopian name for a head of a general of an army. So Raz Tafari. And he's like, and you're a Rastafarian. What's the correlation? And he was kind of a bit baffled, not the usual commercial tourist talk. And we talked about all kinds of aspects of that side of things. And at the end, he gave me a nut, a special nut. And he said, because his whole talk was about living in the rainforest and how about Rastafarians live in the rainforest. And he said, you know a lot about this, young man. Have this nut. He said, if you're feeling unwell, take the nut out of the shell, shave it, and make a tea from it, and it'll make you well. And I thought, am I going to get this back through customs in the airport? I'm going to put it somewhere, have I? And he's like, no, it's quite okay. And I've still got that nut in my little bookcase. I've not had the chance to take it. But it's just a great story that a book like Anthony Mockler could get you into a conversation about Rastafari or with a Rastafarian on a desert island.
Amazing.
Who would have thought?
Amazing. Perfect book. Lovely story. And finally, is there a war games unit, either one that you've owned or one you've seen in a magazine or something that you would love to own and take with you onto the island?
Well, I kind of misread that when you asked me that question, because I thought, as in take a physical unit with you. And I thought, well, if I'm on a desert island, nothing better to have a set of Marine Commandos because they know how to live in that. And I thought, Naval Party 8901, who were the original garrison on 1982 on the Falklands. Who better to help me comfortably live on a desert island? And can you imagine the fireside stories that get shared?
Yeah, absolutely.
What really happened on 2nd of April, and if there's a book that kind of tells you a lot about that modern. Again, this is back to that, the war that we lived through and thought we knew, and you listen then to the real stories from Naval Party 8901. And as they quite rightly said, we were 70 Royal Marine Commandos, jacked up, young and fit. And if you think we discharged 4,500 rounds and only hit 4 people, you don't know us. Yeah. And just like that, I just thought, well, they'd be great to help me live on a desert island, and the stories would be fantastic. So sorry, I misread your question slightly,
that's
but
perfectly valid interpretation. I like that. We'll take that, and that's no problems at all. Well, thanks very much for that, Paul. Some great answers there in the feature section, and some nice discussion as well. So we'll have a break for the last time before we move on to our big topic. So we are back in the big topic section to talk about early war miniatures, and we've just had a recording failure, so this is take 2 for me and Paul, but we'll try and make it take 1 for yourselves out there. And if you remember, Paul, about 10-15 minutes ago, we spoke about early war miniatures as a name, and we had a little bit of a laugh and a joke about how long that lasted as a good idea when you wanted to put some late war figures out. So just tell us about that name choice and how you feel about it now.
Well, early war miniatures really came about because the range that I bought from Tom Lobley, who run a range called Tom's Tins. It was a really good range of World War II figures that no one really knew about. He never really put it on. He never put it online at all. He only really advertised in magazines. He used to go to Sheffield Triples and Duxford and a couple of other shows with them. And I was a customer of his. And long story short, I personally was working, doing a very, very stressful job within IT for military operations. And I thought, if I carry on doing this, it's going to blooming kill me. So like many people approaching their late 40s, you kind of say, well, if I wanted to work myself, what would I do? You know, what do you do? And it was really Alan and Michael, after discussing over a beer, kind of suggested, well, why don't you get into making miniatures? You know, it's something you've always been interested in and you've dabbled with. So I did, and the person who casts for Perry Miniatures, Epp, also did the casting for Tom in Nottingham. So Tom's a Beeston chap, lives in Beeston still to this day. And I met Tom at Duxford in the June of 2010. And we discussed that he wanted to sell the business, and I said I'd like to buy it. I called him in the October, left it a period of time for him to think, big decision. He basically said, "Oh, I didn't think you blooming meant it. You know, you left it so long." And
Yeah.
and I said, "Well, no, it's a big decision, Tom. I want you to have thought about it." So we did a deal. We bought the business, but it was on the proviso. Tom said, "You know, please," he said, "please let me carry on making toy soldiers for you." He said, "If I don't do that, you know, it's what I really enjoy. So he needs to do it." So, and very happily, very happily allowed that to carry on. You know, Tom's a really good designer and a legend, and now a good friend. So I bought it. I think Tom's way of selling figures back with Tom's Tins was there were plastic bags within boxes, and on the tops of the plastic bags there were a little bit of cardboard that said French motorcycles. And when you wanted to buy French motorcycles, you put your hand in the bag and found the ones you wanted and brought them out, went, how much? And yeah, very old school way of doing it. And so it took me 3 months to kind of work out what I actually had. And he had some fantastic ranges of, you know, Norwegians, French, Dutch, Belgians, British BEF, you know, real Polish, really unusual early war subjects. So my father's history in the early war and my keen interest in that subject, I thought, let's call it early war miniatures, you know. And of course that worked for a while. Didn't really work once we started. Once the purchase of Skytrek's 20mm range of the models, not the figures, the models came, and all the wonderful weaponry that was produced by them. We kind of stretched ourselves, and plus Tom also has an interest in the interwar and the First World War. So in fact, Tom is working now on, a bit exclusive for you, Tom. Tom is working on 1914 Belgians to be followed by 1914 Germans, to go with our 1914 French and British that we already do. So, and I always say to Tom, you know, what do you fancy doing, mate? You know, and he sometimes comes up with wacky ideas. I'm like, well, I'm not sure there's much money to be made in that one. And by the way, just because someone else has done a range doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We will often take on stuff that other people do as well, because we want to do it in our style, in our way. So never frightened of that. In fact, it just gives people more choice. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. So anyway, so Tom still makes figures for us. Other people involved in the business. There's Lydia. Lydia is my partner. We both live here on the South Island in the tropics. She does all my post and admin, which is really good because I'm rubbish at it, and I'm just rubbish at doing paperwork. And I pay her in good loving. So she's very overpaid. Never needs a pay rise. Andy brought the tea up. Bless him. Andy is a local island lad, and when I moved over, I put some adverts out to people to come and work with us, and he answered that call. We had an interview, and he didn't know much about World War I or World War II tanks at the interview, because one of the questions was, what's the difference between a Matilda 1 and Matilda 2 tank? And kind of important, if you're going to be packing them, you need to know the difference and making them.
That's my perfect interview question, that is. I'll be all right on that one.
Yeah, you'd have done well, mate. You'd have done well. But he knows an awful lot now about tanks and guns and artillery and uniform styles, because he's had to. And so he does the vast majority of the production and packing now for Dispatch, which is brilliant, because that frees me up to do more of the stuff I'm not very good at doing, like the advertising and putting stuff on the website. For example, there's probably in excess of 100 codes that are not even on the website. They appear at shows because we've made them and packed them, but they're not on the web store. So and I need to do more of that. Tom, obviously, we've talked about being a legend and his history within minifigs. And then Tony, who does some painting for us, Tony Jones, who's a brilliant painter, and I'm getting more and more stuff painted by him. So that's where we started. That's kind of they're the people involved now. I think we talked about moving to the island. It's about just under 4 years ago we moved here. series of things in life meant I had to move house, sell some of my tanks. It's called a divorce, not a good thing.
No.
Best thing could happen to me, but anyway, that's another thing.
Yeah.
And so we moved here. Didn't know anybody, but do you know what? Life's too short. It's like starting the business. I never regret having a go. I gave myself 2 years, was make it work. Something I mentioned in my notes for later, but it's appropriate to say it now. If you want to get into making miniatures and models to be a rich man, you're going the wrong way.
Yeah.
If you want to get into a business where you'll do things you enjoy and are happy and can earn a wage, do it as soon as you can.
Very wise advice.
Yeah.
Very wise advice.
And I'm very lucky with Andy working with us here. He comes here 4 days a week, and we're mates now. We're literally mates. Doing the first review with him in the first year was easy. Doing it now is hard because he's a mate. It's like, right, Andy, I've put my boss hat on now. I never say you work for me, you work with me.
Yeah.
We work together, and it's like, right, let's get all that nonsense out of the way. Let's get a beer and have a game.
Yeah.
So very lucky to have Andy working with us. And I think I said to you, he's almost perfect. If he was ginger, he'd be perfect. But not everyone can be perfect.
He's nearly. They buy him some hair dye.
Oh, I could try. He's got a lot of hair, a lot of bottles of dye. So very lucky in that team to be on this island. I built the workshop when we first came here, and a big helper in that, by the way, was my friend Steve Renwick, who runs Battlezone Miniatures. We met each other at the Derby show. This is an interesting story, if I may, because it does relate to early war miniatures and moving to the island. So we did the Derby show in 2017, which was not in Derby. It was somewhere about 35 minutes away from Derby.
I took my Jutland game to that show, and I just remember driving, and I was looking at my mate going, are you sure this is the Derby show? As London was getting closer and closer and closer. So, I do remember that show very well. There was no space between the trade aisles, and
No.
Anyway,
I
know the one.
We could go into that, but let's not do that. But what was clearly looking like a disaster when we turned up on the Friday, and there was no space for us. And I went and found the organizer, who couldn't be bothered, and he went, "Oh well, can you make your stand in a different shape then?" I was like, "Well, I can, but I'll have to stretch into the aisles because you've left no space." Anyway, he was being berated by lots of traders.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Quite aggressively and quite rightly so. So I ended up putting my stand almost into the front of the stand directly opposite me, which was Battlezone Miniatures. And we traded on a Saturday. It was still quite a good show. There was still a lot of people. It's just very difficult to maneuver, particularly those in wheelchairs. They just couldn't get around. Anyway, I was staying overnight in Nottingham, which was, again, a lot further than I thought from Derby, because it wasn't in Derby. So we drove back, and said to Andy, said to the chap who helped me, it wasn't Andy at the time, we'll get there in the morning. We got there about 10:30, I think. We both a bit hungover. And again, Steve was there. He'd opened up a stand for us, and we got talking, because this Sunday show is always quiet. I was like, "You've got a very familiar accent." And he goes, "Yeah, I grew up in Edmonton." I was like, "Well, so did I." I was like, "How old are you?" He's like, "Oh, back then, 55. Like, "So am I." "What school did you go to?" "Croydon Road." Like, "Bloody hell, you're not Steve Renwick of Lion Road, Edmonton, are you?" Like, "Yeah." It's like, bloody hell. We hadn't seen each other since we were in sort of early teens.
Wow.
And Steve had been trading as Battlezone Miniatures for 15 or 13 years at that point. So he's been in the business a long time. So we instantly clicked. We, the memories flooded back. He was looking to change what he was doing with Battlezone Miniatures. He wanted to get into World War II 20mm models, and I was very happy to encourage that. Long story short, I ended up basically taking the American Skycheck range, which we had, and selling that to him. So he had a base start line of all those lovely American vehicles. And the Sergeant Major miniatures, which I'd bought, had a wonderful range of late war Americans and mid-war Americans. So he got those as payment for helping build the work. Well, he built the workshop. I just laboured for him. So when we moved here, first 4 days was clearing the bamboo jungle. I found 2 Japanese prisoners who were still in there. The war was over. And we cleared that, and we built the workshop, which I think I sent a picture to you of.
Amazing.
Where bifold doors on the end. We look out, all we can see is the ocean. and the RAF when they come past, and the Navy when they come past. It was my dream to build a workshop with that kind of a view. Steve helped me make that happen, and so I've been assisting and helping him where I can. He's off and running now with the 20mm stuff he's doing. Is just beautiful.
Fantastic.
His Russians are just beautiful, and so it's great to see. And now his range is established. I take his Russians and Americans to shows, and he takes my Germans and Japs and other things that complement his ranges to shows that we're not at.
Brilliant.
Because when we're both together, we just leave those bits behind. So that was a great. Derby was a bit of a disaster in many ways, but actually for me, it was the best thing that happened to me.
Fantastic!
In meeting Steve again and getting into contact and finding a very good, true, lovely friend.
Amazing.
Again, after all
amazing
those years.
Coincidence.
So so coincidences exactly. Moving abroad, we built the workshop. Life things happened, forced the move. So many things about Ventnor appealed in terms of, as a kid, I grew up, I think I said to you, down by Shoebury by the sea wall. I always wanted to live near the sea, but the person I was with before never did. And it's like, well, do you know what? I can now. And Lydia, my partner, said, I'd love to live near the sea. So we did. And we moved down here, built the workshop, finally built the man cave now, and various other things. And what a great place to run a miniatures business.
Fantastic. Well, we'll delve into a few different topics around the business itself, and we'll start with scale, if we may. And 20mm. Now, it's been a massive World War II scale for a long time. With rapid fire, I think. Was a big driver for that. Everything was 20mm for that particular set of rules, and that's just gone through a recent renaissance with rapid fire reloaded. So 20mm, you've stuck with it. Have you ever thought about other scales? What's the thought processes with that?
Always 20mm. I think I said to you, I've 53 years now. I've been playing with miniatures and figures in this scale. After that amount of time, it becomes a natural thing when you look at something and when you go to make it.
Yeah.
So as a scale, absolutely, and never in question. It's what I know. It's what I grew up with. I personally like the way the miniatures look on the table and the size of table you can create using 20mm as a scale, and the abundance of choice. Now I know 20mm is not a popular scale with the Nottingham-based Wargames media, because they very rarely, if at all, feature it, and that's a real shame. But if you just think of how many businesses there are involved in making products and miniatures for this scale, it's a list as long as your arm, and many of them are big corporate organisations. If there was not people wanting to buy their stuff, those organisations wouldn't exist. So 20mm has always been popular. For many of us, it's what we started with. Many of your guests I've heard have often referred to getting into the hobby through Airfix.
Yeah.
And yet you hear that storyline repeated in many podcasts from people of a certain age, certainly, are talking about how they got into this hobby. So for me, as a scale, always going to be the one. Interesting about figure height, 20mm is the definition of apparently eye level to foot. I don't look at it that way. The way I look at it is because we're all different shapes and sizes. When I met you, I think I'm a little bit taller than you, but and Andy's much taller than me. But if we were carrying a rifle, the rifle would be the same size. So important when we're doing figures and design, all the equipment is consistent scale, but you'll see our figures have a different size and build. So, for example, our Japanese got an average height of about 5'3". You just look at all those pictures of the terrible British Army surrendering in Malaya.
Yeah.
Big, tall chaps, Percival, big, tall, buck-toothed chap with his shorts, white knees, standing next to a little Japanese fella with a rifle and a bayonet who's 5'3".
Yeah.
So if you're going to do the figures, the equipment's consistent, but the height needs to change. I think it's part of the character of the figures when you're putting them together. So that's the scale. That's always going to be my scale. I game in other scales. For example, I've got quite a large collection of 6mm stuff for GHQ, lovely GHQ and Navor models.
Yes, they are.
And I've also got my old 15mm War of the Roses figures. Still got those. Don't come out very often. So I've still got those. So that's my scale, Ken, and
Yeah.
that's where I'm always going to be.
Yeah, my friends, Richard Harris and Chris Flowers, they do massive games, and Richard runs the legendary Wargames Holiday Centre. They use 20 mil for their rapid fire games, and lots of people have got big collections in that scale, and have stuck with them, and rightly so. It is a good scale for big World War II wargaming, and a very popular one, as you say.
Yeah, Colin's a lovely chap, by the way.
Yeah.
I often have a lovely chat with him and a cuppa at the York show, where I often bump into him and have a chat. And I think what he's done with rapid fire is just fantastic. Again, it helps to make a subject more popular, and people buy our stuff for it as well as other people's stuff for it.
Yeah, there's a huge generation of gamers who got their World War II fix from Colin's rules, and all the subsequent supplements that he did for that particular game. So yeah, much appreciated, Colin. Thank you very much for that. So you've stuck on your scale, which well done, well done. But how do you choose your ranges when you come to think about a new range? I mean, you mentioned earlier on that Tom comes up with some of the most obscure stuff that he possibly can. So what's the thought process when you come to think about a new range, and do customers give you lots of ideas as well?
The honest answer is both routes.
Yeah.
And here's an example from both. A customer at Warfare one year said to me, "Have you seen that new film about the Danish fighting the Germans called April the 9th, or 9th of April is the name of the film? It's in Danish,
Yeah.
but it's really good." And he was so enthusiastic, he got his mobile out and he showed me a little clip from the trailer for the film. I thought, well, that looks good.
Yeah.
That's good. So that was on the Sunday, so it was always quiet on the Sunday at Warfare. So I had some thoughts about it. I spoke to Tom and I did a bit of research, and of course, you quickly realise that they've got something called a Nimbus motorcycle.
Oh yes.
Which is a straight inline 4-cylinder shaft-driven motorbike with a bloody great autocannon on the side. It's like Mad Max 1940. So, being a fan of Mad Max, I just thought, wow, this got me. More research you do. I started looking on various websites. I started asking out for anyone who had information, and I had two lovely Danish gentlemen contact me. I cannot remember both their names, but one was called Lars. And he said, "Oh, I hear you're looking at doing a range of Danes." Bear in mind, this is now the December. I keyed Tom up to it. He was doing some research as well. And he said, "I've got a lot of English translations of Danish military books on the subject. Would you like them?" I was like, "Oh, yes, please. That'd be fantastic." And Lars, and apologies, I can't remember the other gentleman's name, sent me bucket loads of translated and untranslated, but pictures of Danish military equipment. Wow. And also some of the stories that went behind the actions that took place. So previous to that November, if anyone said to me, "Oh," and I think that there was all often common stories about, "Well, why would you do the Danes? They lasted 6 hours. What's the point?" Yeah. It's not much fun. It's a bit like, why would you do a game set in Luxembourg? Well, this recent year, a very good game that's set in Luxembourg has been done by Aid of the Deal Wargames Club, who's got a fantastic game with a great scenario set in Luxembourg. But anyway, back to the Danes. So we rigorously attack this range. And when I do a range, blow me on trumpet, we try to do it as fully as we can. We get as things like the infantry carts, the motorcycles, even made some cavalry. Never released them yet, but made the cavalry, the infantry, the anti-tank equipment and weaponry being carried, deployed, and fired. So we made all this stuff. Tom was really excited. He'd never heard of it before. And with all this reference material that the two Danes had shared with us, we produced this range of figures. And I thought, right, it's approaching April. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to put it on the web store and sell it now. I'll put an update on the web store and say, right, here's the Danish range. Here's a few pictures. Yeah. It goes live. You can start buying it from 5:15 in the morning on the 9th of April, because that's when the Germans crossed the border without asking nicely. And I can honestly say we were flooded with orders on that day and subsequently. And then there's a lovely follow-up. There's two follow-ups, actually. The lovely follow-up is that we got a letter about 4 months later, official Danish government document from the ambassador from Denmark.
Yeah.
And he said, long story short, he said, thank you so much for making a range of miniatures depicting the armies of Denmark in 1940. As you probably realise now, I'm one of your first initial customers, and I'm basically singing our praises for doing it. Tom was just over the moon with such a compliment. And the other follow-up was I was able to share all of that lovely Gucci information to the two fantastic gentlemen, Mark and Stuart of Great Escape Games, who recently delivered a beautiful range of Danes. And they said to me, we often have a beer sometimes at shows or after shows. And they said, Paul, your range of Danes, you got any research? I'm like, have I got some research? I've got bucket loads. And I gave it all to them.
Yeah.
And let's just say we didn't pay for dinner or beer that night. They were really, really generous. And I thank them for that. And I'm really pleased that in 28mm now, you can see models of the Danish army, thanks to those two gentlemen and the efforts of a number of people in the miniatures business to create such things, to give people that choice. So that's the first example of a customer saying, have you thought about? The other one, of course, comes from just what you're interested in, where the passion is. So the passion is what drives you as a designer to either get people to make things or make things yourself, pull them together. And bear in mind, Ken, we mold everything here. We cast everything here and we pack everything here. So to kind of get to that point where you can get things into a mold and then made and then packaged, photographed and coded, you have to have a passion for that subject. If you don't have that passion, you won't see that subject through to being finished. It just won't happen. Or the range will be 10 or 12 figures, So I think having a passion for a subject. So Tom's passion right now is Belgian 1914. He's making lovely figures for it. Into those sculpts, he will pour the passion. When I get them back, I'll fettle with them and do a few bits and pieces, which he knows that I do. And basically we'll make those into a very, very fine set of miniatures. And it's that passion that will take you through the hours and hours and hours of finessing them, molding them, casting them, packing them, photographing them, and then selling them out to the public. So it's where your passion is. So the drive comes often from pictures, subject matter. I think I ticked your box about, where do you sit, history, wargamer and stuff. Well, history is initially, the initial storyline from history. Who else has made, who would want to make a range of Thai army, and the pronunciation, I'll be right on this, Yung Tao.
Yeah.
So Yung Tao are effectively the Thai army's Boy Scouts of an older age with guns.
Right.
And if you speak to anyone passionate about Thai history, and we had a very good customer who lived out there and sent us all this stuff, and the stories of them, these were the people who met the Japanese army who invaded before Pearl Harbor started in 1941 on the beaches above Kotabaru, just on the Malayan Peninsula, and fought them to a standstill.
Wow.
They're Boy Scouts with guns. And there's a lovely little Thai film depicting the whole thing. But that's the gold dust that makes you want to, let's recreate that in miniature. Let's maybe do some games where you've got, who would have thought Boy Scouts fighting the Japanese army fresh off the landing craft in 1941 and winning,
amazing.
Or at least holding their own ground for a good time. That's gold dust in terms of, for me, wargaming and the passion that drives you to make something in miniature.
On a lot of the pictures on your website, you will have photograph next to the miniatures, which I really love. I really enjoyed looking through the website doing research for today, and seeing a picture of a command group, and then there'll be a photograph behind, and you can see where the poses come from and the equipment's come from. I mean, that is proper research at the end of the day, isn't it?
That's my drive. Without wishing to blow me on trumpet, it was seeing pictures like that made me think, I really want to make that in miniature.
Yeah.
I really think that would work. And sometimes it's quite difficult to make all that extra detail, but it's that detail. And you're right. I try and pose some of the original pictures that get me excited about doing a range in the background, because that's what drove that design, was pictures like that, and if not that exact one. There's a glorious one of the Danish army, two fellas sitting with effectively flying helmets on astride their Nimbus, with this magical autocannon on the side next to it, sort of smiling. I thought, you've got me. You got me there. I've got to make that. and you do. And so thank you for noticing that. Not everyone probably notices that detail, and it's appreciated when people do.
There was a command group. I can't remember which one it was now, but there was a command group, and this guy had got it must be some sort of signal board round his chest, with all different like coloured slats on it, and I'm still looking at it trying to work out what it did.
It's Dutch. It's a Dutch army. Dutch army signallers.
Right.
So effectively, that thing rolls up, and then when you unroll it, you plug it in the end of the barrel of your rifle, and then pull the bottom taut, and then within it are a series of flaps. So as you pull the string, the flaps go up, and of course the inside face of the flap is white. So it effectively makes a whole white screen, dark screen, white screen, dark screen. And that's one method the Dutch signalled.
Wow! So the guy didn't stand up with it round his chest then, because I thought that'd be like a really good target if he did.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't do semaphore in the line of fire, would you? It's kind of similar thing, really. Again, I'm very lucky the people I've met and got some very, very good Dutch friends whose knowledge of Dutch military history in 1940 is unpassed. In fact, they wrote books. So there's the best book on the Dutch military in English text is called Holland Paraat by my good friends Jan Gisbers, Antel Gisbers, and Rob Taz. And they're all their own original pictures.
Fantastic.
And in the picture, one of the first pictures is a column of Dutch infantry marching just before the war started. The person leading it is their uncle.
Wow.
And so, and I've been to their place a number of times. You know, Jan makes his own range of miniatures. Rob used to as well. And they're just brilliant. And a subject like that, you know, the 10-day battle for Holland, Bridge Too Far, 1940, if you think about it. Yeah. It's about the Germans trying to get ahead, capture bridges with paratroopers, and you know, one of the first casualties in that campaign. You couldn't make this stuff up. When the Germans came up the main waterway at Rotterdam to land on the island where there's a big bridge, first person who approached them was a Dutch policeman and went, "Oh, you can't park that there," and they shot him.
God.
So it's just wargaming gold, you know. So, but yeah, that's the kind of, I'm back to what excites me, really.
Yeah, no,
and, so unusual ranges.
Yeah, those pictures are lovely. I did enjoy that very much, looking through the figures. So if we move on now to materials, because we're of an age when everything was metal when we first started, and I would imagine that most, if not all, the stuff you did when you started early war miniatures was metal. So you slowly, or I don't know whether you've totally now moved over to supercast. So without giving any trade secrets away, we don't want the recipe to Coca-Cola or anything. Just explain to us, the move over from metal and what supercast is and how it works.
No problem. So yeah, let's start with supercast. So supercast is using a 2-part polymer resin, plastic resin, that when you pour it into a mold cavity and pull it, it's got beautiful surface detail. The detail capture on it is brilliant. I've been doing this thing at shows now whereby I take quite a delicate model and throw it on the floor in front of someone to show them they don't break, they just bounce. Because resin models had a bit of a bad reputation in the early days, and that's because they weren't really resin. They were using effectively gel coat, which you use to coat canoes and do roofs with. And of course, it's really brittle. So supercast, although it's resin, it's actually a 2-part plastic polymer. It's expensive, but I think you get what you pay for. Why move into resin? Entirely self-taught. I did have a bit of coaching from Jim, the master caster, I call him. There's a company called Millicast, who are based in Glasgow, who on the show circuit I'd often have a few beers with Jim. And for the first 10 minutes, I can only understand one word in 5 because it's broad Glaswegian, and anyway, beyond that, what Jim can't mold and cast, nobody can. So in the early days, I was sharing ideas with him and getting his advice on things. But it's entirely now self-taught. And the goal for Supercast has always been to be able to create a model that once you pull it out the mold, you don't have to do much more to it. So, for example, many of the tanks that we do now have a Supercast body with the tracks the pintle machine gun is on there, the exhaust and other things are all on there, even side shuts, and if needs be, are all cast on. But the turret is metal and the gun barrel's metal.
Right.
And that's important because although resin is a wonderful product, it doesn't deal with small items very well, in that they will either bend or they will break. Same is true in 3D printing, and we'll talk about that in a way in a while. But so for resin, small things work better in white metal. So if you can do a combination of the fragile parts being white metal, the core bulk of the vehicle being resin, and then as a modeler, your choice is, do I have the turret hatch open or closed? Do I use the figure that came with it or not? That's it.
Yeah.
You just glue the turret open or closed and then start painting it. And then when you play with it and pick it up and move it, you know that bits aren't going to break on it. So that's the drive to Supercast. When I bought the Skytex range, for those who remember, all their models were metal. Now the patterns, I bought the business for the patterns because the patterns are just beautiful. A lot made by a gentleman called Steve Cox, who makes patterns now for me still occasionally, more for Steve at Battlezone and for people like the Perries and Warlord. He's still a quality old school pattern maker and a real gentleman as well. And his wife makes the best lemon drizzle cake on the planet.
There we go.
That to one
there
side.
We go.
Thank you, Mrs. Cox, by the way. Always appreciated. Yeah. See you at Partisan if you're coming that way again. Lemon drizzle's always welcome. So that's Supercast. That's the drive. Taking what were metal models and turning them into something that effectively looks better, making better use of the detail in the pattern, and making it a product that doesn't weigh a ton. Metal tanks weigh a ton.
Yeah. So just so I can get my head around it, really, the metal casting process that I'm aware or familiar with would be rubber molds, a big pile of them. You centrifugally cast, pouring molten metal into the middle, spin it around, and it goes out and fills the void, and you take them apart. How does the supercast process match to that?
Okay, so you entirely encapsulate the model, all detail and everything, into silicon rubber. You then cut what I think in the trade's called gates. These are the openings into which you pour whichever material you're going to use to actually make the model enter, and then also exit. Things that go in sometimes need to come out. So in traditional mold making, it'd be called a J mold. So you pour at the top, there's the miniature, and then at the back end of it, you have a gate coming out so that the metal, the fluid, whatever it is, can flow. And then using the right materials. So again, it was the technical director of the person we buy the materials from who said the Shore value of silicon rubber is quite a key thing. Shore is the hardness of the material. And they come in certain Shores. So you can buy a Shore 15, Shore 20, 23, 27. But sometimes for some models, you want it to be really flexible because it's quite difficult to get it out. So you need the Shore to be low, and they don't come in that Shore. And others, you want it to be really quite stiff because it's quite a big model. So I started blending catalysts. And it's his advice. Said, why don't you try blending catalysts? Because that way you'll make your own Shore. So Supercast is a combination of really smart way of gating and cutting the model, the way you mount it to create the gates for where the fluid is poured in, and getting the right Shore of the rubber such that it is flexible. Sometimes the walls are really, really thin. With the thickness of wall, you need the right Shore. So Supercast is an evolving art. I'm always practicing and experimenting. It's never over. Andy will tell you we're always trying new ideas for casting. So you pour this material into this specially made block of silicon rubber, effectively. You then put it into a pressure chamber. So a pressure chamber is where you put it into a positive pressure of about 4 bar. Now what that does is any bubbles, any fluid that you create, even in metal, you can have a certain viscosity and bubbles form. So the reason to put something into a positive pressure is any bubbles that are still within are condensed under the pressure. Once the resin is set, of course, those bubbles can't escape. They can't expand again. So that's effectively most of the trade secrets of Supercast. They want to be doing it now. I don't care. I actually, on that note, someone who's in the same business as us, I won't say which business it is, whose models are mostly metal, has spoken to me about it. I've actually said, come and spend a couple of days over here. I'll show you everything I know. Because I bought your models when I was on that side of the counter. I don't want you to disappear. I want you to thrive and grow because you make great models. And the more of us doing it, the better. So I'm hoping at some point they may well take us up on that and come over. And I'll happily, I said, bring a couple of masters. We'll mold them. We'll cast them. You'll go home with castings of them and how to do it.
Awesome. Great idea. Is a lot of that around the increasing cost of metal, moving to alternative materials?
I think metal has been a factor in more recent years. Certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, the price of metal has fluctuated enormously. Before that, it was reasonably stable. Well, certainly the grade of alloys that we had bought, but certainly in the last 2 years ago, it doubled, which is eye-watering. And even now, it's sitting much, much higher than it has been before. But in truth, the drive towards resin happened really before we started to see some major fluctuations in metal prices. So I'm going back 6, 7 years ago now. The drive really was metal tanks have had their day in terms of 20mm models. In terms of wargaming, they're just too heavy, too cumbersome, and as testified by all the old Skytrex molds, they ended up binning. That bulk of object when you cast it will just burn away even the best molds. So there's a number of reasons in truth behind the move. The main one was because I wanted to make the model built and ready, and it's not possible to cast that level of detail in one piece in metal in that scale. So kind of ticking in a few boxes, but the main one was moving to a better material that can cast one piece.
And there's obviously other methods of making stuff, and many figure manufacturers have gone over to plastic recently. And I understand that the molding process is quite expensive for that. Is that
Yes.
something that you've considered?
No, it's not at all. I kind of followed in a way, certainly the early days, quite closely with what Alan and Michael were doing with Renedra in their quest to move into plastics. Their first plastics, the American Civil War sets, are just phenomenal. I mean, everything they make is bloody phenomenal, but their move into plastics was quite a big gamble because it was a considerable chunk of change to get that piece of work done. And done in, there's a number of ways. The little I know about it from talking to the two twin brothers who ran Renedra, along with the lady who's the finance director as well, one of their wives. I can't remember her name now. Diane, I think it is. Anyway, the cost of doing it, because the method they use is pantographing, which is the old method of using or creating, cutting mold surfaces by pantographing. So pantographing is where you pass a fine pointed object over the surface of another, and that will then transfer that individual movement to a drill bit that's basically milling and cutting. And it's the reason why the Perries make their 3-ups, so 3 times the size, and obviously the pantograph takes that movement down by 3 in the cutting process. So it's very skilled, very, very, very impressive piece of work. But it's not something I've ever considered being part of, mainly because it's not something. I never wanted EWM to be a big business. I really didn't. I know this. We were going to probably talk about this, but it's an important point to register here. My goal is not to kind of make loads and loads of money, because I'm in the wrong business if I wanted to do that. It's about making models that excite, the passion and drive to make them. We'll earn a wage on the back of it, and thank you very much. That's it. Plastics is a whole different level of investment and a level of companies' involvement in such a thing.
I suppose the other elephant in the room then is 3D printing, and it's getting to a stage where some people are running companies on that basis, and obviously as a business you're going to have thoughts on it. So is it something you've looked at yourself for manufacturing, or how do you feel about 3D printing?
Well, I've got direct experience of it because back to my Dutch model makers, they've been using 3D printing to make their masters for their model ranges for many years now. And Rob is very much a keen advocate of that technology. So a lot of my thought process is driven from conversations with him, who's hands-on doing stuff. And I think you can break it down into two areas. I think there's dangers with 3D printing, and I'll talk about what I think those are. And I think there's opportunities, and I'll hopefully cover those as well.
Yeah.
Some of the dangers I think that we're seeing from 3D printing is there's a lot of people, as you say, making and selling models now in the hobby, but they're charging hobby prices. It's not realistic. It's unrealistic. If you're a real business, then you'd need to charge what the true professionals in 3D printing, some of those that you've hinted at, are doing. The problem that brings is that the people who are doing it as a hobby and charging hobby prices, they come and they will go. They'll go mostly because they'll get to the end of the printer's life and go, oh, I need a new one. I can't afford one. Oh, bloody hell. Perhaps if I was charging the right money in the first place, I'd have saved up enough to buy more equipment or more materials. So I think that's a danger. And it certainly undermines the work of people who are doing it professionally in proper workshops and charging proper prices. Certainly the quality is highly variable, and I'm pointing that comment more directly at the hobby makers, not those who are doing professional work. There's some absolutely outstanding 3D prints and models and sculpts being designed and made at the moment, but the hobby 3D printers are a danger to that successfully getting off the ground and being more prevalent. Certain models and scales really suit that technology better than others. And here's my example. 28mm vehicles and figures are better suited because the physical size of the miniature means that the parts themselves are less fragile. If you take a rifle in 20mm in scale and print it in a resin, it's highly vulnerable. Many of the vehicle gun barrels I've seen on 20mm models printed are too small. They're sorry, not too small. They're too flimsy to use for wargaming. They're the right scale, but because they're the right scale, they're too flimsy. And again, that came out of a conversation with, again, my Dutch friends I met at the first show I did at Cavalier. Actually, I met them, and they asked me, well, why do you want to make a Wargames version? Because some of my patterns come from them. I pay them to use and make a wargaming version of their models.
Yeah.
And the penny clicked one day up in Jan's man cave over many bottles of beer and fine cheeses. He said, I understand now. He said, because you're picking them up and moving them all the time, the parts which are too flimsy will break. Whereas my models, I make them, I paint them, and I put them on display, and that's where they stay. Occasionally coming out to go to a show if he's showing them as a painted model at a competition or something, or not a competition, just a display. So the scale thing, I think, is relevant for 3D printing, and gets worse as you get smaller. Imagine a rifle to scale in 15mm, and how flimsy that will be when you're picking up ranks of men. It's the flimsy nature of the resin, which is one reason even in 20mm I make them in white metal, because I think it's more sturdy. It's better because we're picking them up and moving them. Those who are doing 3D printing, I've actually spoke to, again, it's not a hobby, it's a full-time bloody job. And hats off to those people out there who are making a living out of producing 3D printed figures and models, because they're doing it professionally, but it is a full-time job. And hopefully they are the ones charging business prices, not hobby prices. So hats off to them.
The techniques the printers now, there's quite a lot. It takes a long time to print something, so there's not really the economies of scale there. You would have to buy lots of printers to produce lots of figures in a relatively short space of time.
Yeah, I think so. No, and there's some other factors. So again, I'm only taking this. I'm kind of praising a conversation I've had with Rob and Hans, who do the 3D printing for the Dutch. In the world of 3D printing out there, and I'm sure the professionals who do this are aware, we have in effect with people sharing files, taking files, and then making a little change and calling it their own, you have in effect a wholesale piracy of people's 3D print designs being undertaken. And that's not good for any business or any hobby. Again, I've not seen it direct. I'm really talking on Rob, who's every day is on the internet looking for files, looking for the latest chatter in the world of 3D printing, and it's an issue. And I'd really like to speak to some other people doing 3D printing professionally and get their perspective on that. But certainly, the ability to share that file and change it, tweak it a bit, call it your own—that's piracy.
Yeah,
that's not your own work, and you shouldn't profit from your own stuff that's not your own work.
No, definitely.
It's really easy to make a really desired model, for example. I actually spoke to a lovely gentleman who was selling some 3D prints at the Bournemouth show, and he had a couple of really nice tanks and then lots of other things. And I said, they're really, really nice, but where's the rest of the range? He said, what do you mean? I only sell the Panther. The Panther's the most popular one. Why would I do the Panzer One? No one wants that. There in itself is an issue, because you want people to do a whole range. We don't want just people making the thing that's going to sell the most. I think there's two other things. If you okay, we talk about it. Again, Rob gave me a real understanding of how the technology works. The UV cured resins, which produce some absolutely superb models, they're cured by UV light. And I was talking to Paul Edelston of Empress about this a couple of weeks ago, whereby he said, I think we're facing a problem here. And I tend to agree with him that when we all bought plastic figures 30, 40 years ago, we've painted them all lovely, thought, they'll last forever. But actually, they're starting to crumble and brittle. UV light is what cures these 3D prints. Now, if you're not gonna play with your molds at night all the time, are you? You're gonna put them in UV at some point. Are we storing up the problem that we never envisaged when we bought all our plastic ranges 30, 40 years ago? Are we going to see a similar thing? We certainly saw it with early resins. Some of the early resins are it's called resin cancer. They start crumbling and fall into pieces. They form a white powder and collapse. And the last point, and it was Hans, who does all the 3D drawings for Gisber's models, actually said, I came from a world where 3D printing was how we designed and created prototypes for engineering. He was a ship's architect. So 3D printing was initially designed for one or two off productions of a prototype, which you would then take. And then if you created a lost wax version of it, you'd then make a bronze fitting or another mold. You'd use that impression to cast it in a material that you could then make a better mold out of, might be a ferrite, non-ferrous metal, whatever. 3D printing, as you kind of hinted at, was never really envisaged for mass production. For the mass production of things. Now, it's starting to do it. We're starting to see it. But as you said, do you really want to be in a workshop where you've got 10 UV printers, where you have to wear a gas mask to actually operate in that? Or certainly the protection measures are more required. I saw on a Wargames blog recently that someone was warning. It was a 3D printing professional, by the way, and good on him, saying, I've heard that people are actually, to cure the mold line or the ridge lines in FDM prints, people are airbrushing UV resin over them to smooth out the detail. So do you really want to be doing that? You're you're aerosoling something that's cured in 3D. Can you imagine if it gets on your contact lens and you go out in the sun? So there's some dangers in there that I think hobbyists who are doing this and charging silly prices are not helping the business, those in 3D printing professionally, and others in the hobby as well. Now, saying that, there's many opportunities. Some of the prototypes that I've seen being made, and Rob has made for me. He's drawn the wheel on our Dutch 6-inch howitzer. Rob designed and made that and printed it in 3D, and then I took it and then cast it in metal. Absolutely brilliant. I could never. If you could have made a wheel like that as a traditional pattern, but it would be a pain in the backside to do. So, as a prototype, he made it. We now reproduce it in metal. So that's what it was initially the concept was for the aerospace and engineering industries who were first adopters of it in the 90s. It certainly can make our hobby, those who have that desire to want to create a miniature, more accessible than, say, traditional routes like casting in metal, casting in resin, setting up a big workshop to do it. It means that you can start by producing some really good 3D prints and actually getting online and becoming a presence in this hobby, in this business. Fan-bloody-tastic. If you've got that drive, you've got that in your nature to create in miniature, fantastic. This is an outlet for that. So welcome it entirely. And just to say, in our hobby right now, in this business, there's never been a better time. If you think about it, Ken, there is more choice. There are more people coming into this business. It's a golden time for hobbyists. When I go back to the kind of 70s and I wanted a Morbihan range, there wasn't one, so I had to kind of scratch and make some pretty crude figures back then. Now you're spoiled for choice in multiple scales. That's a good thing. It's a sign of a buoyant and thriving hobby and businesses for people. So I just think there are opportunities, but there are dangers with 3D printing. And that's a person who uses some of the design work myself for some of the models we make. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It's a very interesting topic, and there is because there is a large percentage of the historical hobby in our later middle age, should we say? um who I mean, I myself, I don't mind paying money for models, so there's less danger of me looking for that cheap source of material, of figures or models. So I think we've got a little bit of a buffer, if you like, with lots of people like myself who will prefer to buy rather than, I don't want a 3D printer, I don't want another hobby. I'm quite happy with the hobby I've got. And if I need a 20 mil tank, I'll send you 10 quid, 20 quid, whatever I need to send you, and you'll send me one, and I don't have to worry about it. The largest level of stress I will have will be opening the package. So there's lots of people like myself who just want the figures at the end of the day. So I think in future generations, when my lad is in his early 20s, he's well into this sort of technology, there's more chance of him doing it, but he's more into science fiction gaming, so it will be more along that hobby. But yeah, no, it's very interesting chat at all indeed about that. So that brings me on to talk about the actual selling of the figures, if you like. And you regularly attend a number of shows throughout the UK during the year. So I just kind of wanted to have a chat with you really about which shows you choose to do and why, and how the show forms part of your business.
Okay. Well, you're right. We do attend a number of shows. My favourite show ever was Crisis in Antwerp.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you ever been there at all? Have you ever attended that one?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, you've missed out on a real treat there.
Yeah.
It's a favourite for many reasons. Many of those reasons are there are many different Belgian beers that you can sample and experience.
Yeah.
But there are others too. The club make it so welcoming, so friendly. Can't do enough for you. It's easy to get in. It's easy to get out access wise. Customers come there. We see once a year. We used to see once a year from all over Europe. It was just a delight. The day went so fast for me there. I loved every visit and every time, and I've still got friends, the organising members of that club, who we see, we talk to quite regularly. I would really wish that would start again. What I really dislike about shows, and I suppose I'm getting older. I'm getting grumpier, I suppose. Maybe might be a ginger thing. I don't know. Who knows? I really dislike shows where the trade space is overcramped.
Yeah.
Where all the traders are bunched up. There's not enough space between trade stands, so you get crowd bunching. Particularly people with rucksacks make that crowd bunching even worse. And the people who come to visit the show, our customers as well, can't move around easily. And I'm getting more picky about them things, and I suspect they are too. You go to a good few shows.
Yeah.
You must know why certain shows make you want to go back, and others you think, actually, I'm not sure about. I want to go there. For example, where you can get a decent cup of tea or coffee for those who want, without having a mortgage.
Yeah.
That's a little factor. It's a small one, but it's certainly a factor. So some of my favourite shows, for some of the reasons I've talked about, in terms of friendly, easy access. The organisers communicate really, really well with you. they actually welcome you when you say, "Hello, Paul, I haven't seen. How's it been the last?" All the venue, also the city. So, for example, York. York is one of my favourite shows. I love York, and I'm not saying that because I'm on the Yarkshire podcast. I really like York.
Yeah.
Two of my favourite places in York are the the House of the Trembling Madness. For those who've been there will know it does one of the finest selections of Belgian beers in York. And oh god, I forgot the bloody name of it now. The Minster Inn, which is on the city walls, just fantastic. And so we always try and get a hotel near staying there, and it's the reason why we always take an extra day off to spend a day in York. Just to spend a lovely day walking around York. So the venue, the city, is an attraction. Beachhead at Bournemouth, that's a relatively new show. It's the guys from Pool Entoyment who are the main brains behind organising that. Peter Entoyment, just a wonderful guy, and so lovely to see his success over recent years with what he's done with that business. He organises a great show. It's a whole weekend, and we do a few favours for sailors. We get across the ocean, we go and do the show, and then we go back again. Hammerhead, it's one of the trade organised shows. Interestingly, it's actually Callista and Paul and Sally, bless them, who do the bulk. Sally does the bulk of the organising to make that show happen, and it's a splendid show. Partisan, the gentleman who organised that, Trix and Rich and the others. And that show has an attraction because the quality of the games that are there, but it's also in a well-spaced, easy to move around, well-lit environment that's easy to get in and out as a trader. And the price of trading there is good value for money. You can't say that about all the trade shows on the circuit.
Yeah.
So they're just some of the reasons why those particular shows attract me. As I say, maybe I'm getting grumpy as I'm getting older. I don't know, but I'd like to think that our customers want to see similar things when they come and visit.
Yeah, and because it's not going to be straightforward for you, is it? Because you're going to have to, everyone does, but you're going to have to pack up and travel off the island, and then Bournemouth's not a massive journey, but York, for example, is a long journey up the motorway. So I would imagine, and overnight stay costs, etc. Your table, your fuel, all that's got to be made back in takings, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, and it's a factor, and it's one I pondered over when moving to the island, because you've got to add the extra distance, as you say. York is about 5.5 hours in my van. But Andy to talk to, bless him. We put a podcast on when we're doing that journey. We can make that go. Overnight accommodation in some places, like in Nottingham, with some well-known people staying there, is an opportunity to visit the trip and maybe play a game and certainly catch up with old mates. So kind of making it work really, as well as, yes, it is a journey, but York, absolutely worth it. It's one of my favourite UK shows. For the reasons we spoke about. It's the club there, they're waiting for you to turn up and help you unload. And they'll even help you pack at the end of it. That's such a lovely thing. I can't. Anyone organising shows out there, please, if you get your members to help traders offload and load again, it is so well received from the trader side.
Yeah.
It really, really is.
It's something that we've tried to do at Leeds at Fiasco for many years. Unfortunately, now most of us are in our mid to late 50s and early 60s, so carrying stuff isn't as easy as it was when we were running Fiasco in the 1980s. But we do try and do that at Leeds, I have to say. So obviously we've been through the period of COVID, and there was no shows, and I imagine you were running things on the internet. So how was that period, and how has that affected your business model going forward? Are you doing more business online?
I think the level of business online is about the same, maybe a little bit down at the moment, because people, it's harder. What's cashes in people's pockets is there's a lot of calls on that in the last 6 months. It was a bizarre time, made worse by me personally. In fact, we'd only just moved here, and then within moving here and then obviously couldn't really get to meet neighbours.
Yeah.
I caught the bloody thing in summer 2 summers ago, and that was the the year I was building this place, which is why I was behind 6 months, because I had to wait till I'd recovered and then build it basically. So I was still putting the roof on in October, the year before last, because I was that far behind. So it certainly impacted things in that sense. Andy caught it, bless him. So customers, though, the vast majority of our customers, and it is the vast majority, 99% are fantastic. You just say to them, listen, we're a bit behind. It's going to take us 4 weeks rather than 2. Hope that's okay. And during that period, and certainly after, it's been a case of, that's all right. We'll get it when it gets here. I've got other stuff to paint. So it's not the end of the world, but it certainly had an impact. I think the biggest impact has been on the price of raw materials. That's a much bigger in-your-face reality. So power, just to run the melting pot, to run the compressors, to run the casting machine, costs a lot more now. It costs Andy more to get here and back. So what wages he gets is under more pressure. So it creates all kinds of pressures. But yes, lockdown caused a number of issues, and yes, we did pick up some extra business. We couldn't cope with it, and I was very honest with people and saying, I'm really sorry, we're turnaround times. A thing I will quote even now is, we're not bloody Amazon. You order it from us, you ain't gonna get it the next day unless we've got it in stock, and you're the only order in line. Typically we try and get stuff turned around in 7 days. We try. That can, busy times, like when we had a batch of shows in February and March, that stretched to 3 weeks, and for some orders it was 4 weeks. But most people, you let them know, they're like, don't worry about it, understand, we'll get it when we get it. So I think we're very lucky in this hobby, in this business, and you could take a check from someone and it would be okay. There's not many businesses now
who would do that, no,
where you'd have that kind of customer. No, it really isn't. So
a number of companies have kind of stepped back from the show circuit following COVID and not returned. Some pretty big names as well. Is it still important for you to meet people in person at shows and not sell, but have a relationship with those customers through that medium of actually physically meeting them?
Oh yeah, Ken, I can't tell you. I mean, most shows, I'm just smiling from ear to ear from the moment the door opens to the moment and after the door closes, because sometimes it's the one time in the year I get to meet that person. People do send me pictures of what they've painted and what they've done with the things, which I encourage enormously and love it, and we'll have conversations with that. But the chance for people to come and see us and physically see the things up there. You can tell a lot from the internet and pictures, but there's nothing better than actually seeing it. And on our display stand, which you may have seen, you can, if you stand on one side of it, you can still see through to the other side. And I put that near where the little desk where we kind of take the money and where my ginger nuts are kept. And for me, it's lovely because I've got one ear open and I'm hearing people bringing their friends up to the display and going, yeah, look, that's what they look like. There's those German tanks, or that's those Polish infantry. So, they're bringing their friends and telling them and getting excited about something that we've designed and we've made and we've brought to that show. That's a buzz that I never got working in IT, I can tell you.
Yeah. No, you wouldn't get in that job, would you? Well, that's fantastic to hear, and it's lovely to hear that, because I still very much enjoy the social aspect of the shows and meeting people who have been guests and future guests, etc., and people who listen to the podcast as well. It's very much a social thing, but obviously as a business, you do need to make sure that you are able to finance those trips as well, and it's good to see that so many of the war games traders are still going to shows. It's a shame that a number of them have dropped off. I hope they come back and talk to people. It was like there was a phase in the I think it was the mid to late 80s where they started, no, early 90s probably, where they started war games by email, and a friend of mine at the club said, "Why don't they just bloody talk to each other?" So yeah, I much prefer the social side of things, as you can well imagine.
Oh, totally. And I think shows have got to evolve a bit more. You're seeing some new things at some shows. For example, the table sales, where you can hire a table for a couple of hours and sell all your old crap off, but that's, of course, that's someone else's treasure. And for me as a trader, I'm like, I can't wait. Andy, look after the stand. I need to go and look at the latest batch of table sales I've just put out, because anyone loves rummaging through other people's old stuff, because some of the treasures you want are in there. So seeing some shows doing those as opposed to your traditional bring and buy table, I think that's a big plus. I first saw that in Antwerp with the Crisis show more than 10 years ago, and it's really nice to see them doing it at other shows in the UK. That's a really nice thing. So, and talks, getting interesting people in to do a talk. So, one thing that stands out for me about Hammerhead is the public are there for longer.
Yeah.
Now, and I don't know all the reasons for that, but I'd hazard a guess at one factor. And one factor is that more of the games, I think nearly all the games there, are participation games.
Yeah.
And they in themselves create a little crowd, not just those playing, but those interested and following, either your mate playing or people playing. So keeping people at shows longer, it's quite disheartening for a trader if you go to a show and then see +1, it's emptied out. Some of the shows I went to in the past, the Derby show we talked about earlier. Come bloody 1 o'clock, it was empty. Just all the aisles were full of traders because you couldn't walk between them. But there wasn't that many paying public in there. Yeah. So that's very disheartening. And shows need to have more things like that. I know Bournemouth, the Entoyment boys, they have historians in doing chats and talks about certain subjects. So you can dip out of your competition or your because a lot of competition games going on there, or looking around all the trade stands and actually go and spend an hour listening to someone talk about a subject that hopefully has interest to you. So that's another good thing, but we need more. I think people need to think more about what can keep and bring people to their shows.
Yeah, no, it's good. Some good ideas in there. Some good ideas. Well, I've been keeping you chatting for quite some time now, and with our technical issues, we've gone on even longer. So I'll just finish off by asking you, what's the future for EWM? What's coming up? What's Paul Thompson going to be doing in a few years' time with the company?
Oh, bloody hell! I don't think that far ahead, Ken. This,
all right,
this
what are
year,
you going to be doing tomorrow?
Okay, well, this year. Today's gone now, really. So I'm finishing off these range of British Army for East and North Africa, Middle East, and the Far East. I think the Far East is a pretty unexplored area to follow up on. Tom's working on some early First War models, which are great. I'm really looking forward to. I've seen a couple of the models that have come back from that already, so that's really exciting. Early War Americans. I did a range of Philippine scouts. The battles in the Philippines, Wake Island, and all the other little places where early war Americans in their very almost First War uniforms in some way, but in summer dress, fought some great battles against the Japanese. So that, in line with the Far East Handbook, the Richard and Co. are whatever they go to. I find myself more and more drawn to playing their games.
Yes,
and Andy's. Andy's taken up the chain of command, and he's forced him, trying to hold him back. Basically, he wants to go painting lots of forces so we can have more and more campaigny style games. What a Cowboy! I'm looking forward. I got the rule book. Thank you, Richard, and I'm looking forward to playing that. With that, Andy's keen as mustard. We're already coming up with our designs there. And really get more games on the table here. Now the studio is usable, finished, a good working space. Actually use it more for gaming.
Yeah.
And I really would like at some point to transition all the models I've collected over the years in the periods I play, mainly World War II, to models of my own manufacture.
Oh,
now, that's a big process. Because I've got, when figures were Skytrex before, so I could say, well, they're mine anyway, but they weren't mine when I bought them. And other figure ranges that I want to actually have all the figures my own designs. That's a big goal, and I need to do more painting. I don't do enough painting at the moment, so that's something I want to do. And some of the podcasts here, the Paint and Chat podcast, Alex at Storm of Steel,
Alex's one,
Richard's one, they're really good. I try and listen in on those, and I don't know what the reluctance is to pick up the paintbrush and do some, but I need to do more.
Yeah.
And I want to do more. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the goal.
Well, fingers crossed we'll get there pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's been lovely talking to you today, Paul. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Ken.
I always leave the opportunity for my guests to ask me a question at the end of the podcast. Have I escaped, or have you got one?
Oh, well, the only question is really, have you ever been to the South Island, to the English tropics?
I have a very, very long time ago. One of my relatives, auntie and uncle on my mum's side, lived there. I think they're still there now. They'll be well into their 80s, and they lived there. And I went on a holiday. Oh, I must have been probably 8, 9 years old. So I
Right.
haven't been for a very long time.
Okay. Well, if you're ever down on the South Island, come and see us. We'll make you a cup of Yorkshire tea
Yeah,
here in the English tropics,
that.
and you can look at my neighbour's bananas.
Oh, that's an invitation if I've ever had one. Thanks very much, Paul. If you'd like to say good
Thanks,
night
Ken.
to the audience.
Good night, audience, and keep up the great work, mate. Really enjoy it.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
So there we go. What a lovely chat with Paul. What a great guy. So many wonderful stories and a wonderful company that produces some fantastic stuff in 20mm, a range that I'm not necessarily known for, but I do very much appreciate Paul's figures and vehicles. They are of an exceptionally high quality, and I'm just looking for an excuse to start a project with his figures, and hopefully I'll get a chance to do that in the very near future. So thank you once again, Paul, for your time. I hope everyone who is with us has enjoyed that chat with Paul. Very, very informative and hopefully very entertaining too. You know, I used to worry about the length of these videos, but talking to people and you out there, if you're painting figures, you're probably thinking, "Oh, I'm going to have to get up in a minute and move stuff around." 3 hours is not a massively long painting session or a gaming session, or if you're driving to work or commuting, however you listen to this podcast, you can always stop, and that's why I have breaks in the show for people to do that. So, thank you very much for listening. Much appreciated. Just leads me on to announcement for the next guest for podcast 44. And I'm going to be speaking with Pete Berry from Backer Spinachers, who, of course, are a 6mm company. Oh my God, shock horror. The world is going to explode. I don't think it is, because Pete's a really nice guy. And I've had a couple of really good chats with him over the years at shows, etc. So we're going to chat with Pete about Bacchus and all sorts of stuff. If you notice, his name is on your copy of Forlorn Hope, if you've got that set of English Civil War rules. So there's lots of stuff for us to chat about, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'll see you in probably 3 weeks' time with Pete. So until then, look after yourselves. Sithee.